Chapter 1. Harry Potter. Nothing Not Earned This is a work of fan fiction set in the Harry Potter universe created by J.K. Rowling. This work is not for profit. All characters and settings within that are borrowed from those works remain the property of J.K. Rowling, her heirs and successors. This work will remain weaving within and around the canon structure, but will draw upon older folklore which J.K. Rowling herself grew up exposed to, and which I have chosen to weave a little more deeply into the story. I am also not writing for children, and grew up child and grandchild of veterans before joining the army myself, so if my goblins have a morality that has very little to do with Dumbledore's famous second chances and clearly defined stance on non-violence, any offensive content would be entirely my fault. Griphook was not a happy goblin. Director Ragnart, king of all the goblin clans of wizarding Britain, looked upon the Potter account manager and sneered. "You have been taken, and taken after having been warned of the danger." Director Ragnart sneered, fingering the axe hanging from the side of his desk. Griphook felt the presence of his clan dagger at his waist, but it was beneath his coat, and before he could free it and close with his king, Griphook's head would be bouncing backwards from his body. The director had been in charge of Gringotts in Britain for almost 60 years, and the number of challengers is not known, for the bodies didn't leave through the front door, but out the ass of the Gringotts, dragons in rather harder to identify clumps. I have managed the Lord James Potter's accounts since his ascension, and our profits have done nothing but swell as our bargains are more and more in our favor, due to the young lords being more warrior than merchant. Griphook said, defending his record prior to yesterday. Ragnart smiled, and a forest of sharp goblin fangs flowered in his mouth as he steepled his fingers and looked down upon his errant goblin. Ragnart laughed and twisted the metaphorical knife in his subordinate, hoping he could learn before Ragnart stuck a real knife into him. Yes, Lord Potter is a pure-blooded noble, an aura, and a most trusting gentleman, unlike his father Charles, who was a dangerous and meticulous player of the great game. The Potter vaults grew full to bursting under his lordship, and we did well enough, even if our portions were smaller than I would have liked. The young lord does little better than breaking even, while our own share grows. The young lord fights like half a goblin. His enemies fall, but their gold falls with them. His glories bring no profit. This was the second greatest insult a goblin could offer, for a warrior's duty to the clan was to fight to provide for his clan, to win, and not profit was to dishonor the battle itself. Both goblins laughed, and Griphook thought himself safe. That is when Director Ragnart struck. Yet Lady Potter, the former Miss Evans, has been through 3 account managers, each selling her account at a loss, until one fooled you into taking it on as part of Lord Potter's account. Her vault was small, muggle-born witch of no notable ancestry, yet gold flowed to it like blood from a cut throat, and none of it stuck to our hands. Ragnart smiled like the dragons when a prisoner was lowered for execution. Griphook snarled. She is a witch. Lord Potter treats her as some simple housewife, yet she bargains like a goblin, charms like a Vila, and strikes like a starving basilisk at the slightest weakness. Ragnart smiled. Hair red as fresh spilled blood, eyes green like the killing curse. Too tall, no claws to speak of, and teeth that would be hard-pressed to tear open a throat, but for all that, if my son were to bring her home, my wife would have her chained with wedding gold and bearing a hearth-mother's ring before the door closed behind her. Funny-looking or not, that one has the soul of a goblin, a better goblin than you. The knife twisting within him, Griphook cast his eyes down to stop an angry retort that would cut short his life, or worse, his career. It was one clause she wanted to add to her son's trust account in return for a whole percentage of his account profit. Griphook whimpered, memory of his gold lust overcoming his warrior sense shaming him. Like a niffler to the trap, she baited you with pocket galleons and left Gringotts on the hook for an unknown and potentially limitless liability. Ragnart roared, his calm failing and his axe coming quick to his hand. Speak the clause. Tell me again what the witch tricked you into signing an agreement to. Ragnart demanded. Griphook snarled and spoke the hated phrase that could doom his entire clan, for the goblin nation would honor the terms, but if gold flowed out of other coffers than his clan's to cover it, his clan's blood would flow in return. In return for an additional 1% of all net growth of Harry James Potter's account, Gringotts will undertake to protect the person and acquired assets of said Harry James Potter from all curses, compulsions, enchantments, and legal entailments, until such time as he attains his majority and seat in the Wizargamot. Ragnar slammed his axe down, cleaving his own desk in two. The Potters are at war with Voldemort, the greatest dark wizard since Grindwald, the foulest sorceries forgotten since Herpo the Foul have been dug up to use to the most trivial of his ends, and his twisted genius continues to push into curses the Black family would not touch. And you have not only promised to keep the young lord clear of all curses and compulsions, but to pay his legal fees until he comes into estates that Voldemort will never let him possess. In the event the Dark Lord wins, Gringotts will be liable for Harry James Potter's protection for life. In the event that the Dark Lord is cast down, Gringotts is liable for the protection of Lord Harry James Potter and any properties, assets, and even brides until he passes his owls, comes of age, and chooses to take up his seat in the Wizengamot. Should he fail to pass his owls, die before his majority, or flee the country and not take up his seat, Gringotts will be in breach of contract, and all the penalty clause for a most ancient and noble house will come due. It would not bankrupt the nation, but it would set them back at least 300 years. Heads would roll, not simply Griphook, but his entire clan down to the babes in arms and the elders in their dotage. Griphook knew what Ragnar wanted, and he acted with the courage and desperation of a goblin warrior facing certain death, or a Gringotts account manager facing an audit. I, Griphook of the Hematite clan, of the shining Gringotts dynasty of the great goblin nation, do hereby swear that I will undertake at my own cost to deal with all curses, compulsions, enchantments, and legal entailments of young Lord Harry James Potter at my own expense, until such time as he attains his majority and takes up his seat in the Wizengamot. This I swear lest the gold spill from my vaults like blood from a slit throat, lest my weapons rust and break, my runes bleed out their silver, and my blood turn to water in my veins. Griphook swore, drawing and cutting his own palm in the ancient ritual. Power flared around the blood, burning it in black flame as it seared his flesh closed, as magic bound the oath to his very soul, flesh, and through him to his entire clan. Goblins took no thing not earned, but gave up nothing so taken without blood. Griphook was soaked with sweat, straightening his pinstriped suit carefully. The oath was potentially terrible. Still, 1% of the earnings of one of the most powerful families in wizarding Britain was huge. How many curses could a baby acquire in his crib? Unless the world hated Griphook more terribly than any goblin in history, there should be nothing in Harry Potter's next 16 years that should require more than 10 minutes with the duty curse-breaker. Griphook smiled as he returned to his office. After all, what is the worst that could happen? James Potter was not happy. Look, Lily, you know how Dumbledore feels about that sort of thing. Ritual magic is dark. James said softly, trying to use soothing tones to stem the reaction those words drew like sparks from hammered iron when Dumbledore spoke them. Women's magic, you mean? He is happy enough to use ritual magic for his lordship, to use ritual magic as supreme mugwump of the Wizengamot, to gain power over all the families sworn to it, to stand as headmaster of Hogwarts, as the focus of the power the founders intended to be a check and balance against the power of the Wizengamot over its students. Dumbledore suddenly is against ritual magic when it belongs to women, when it is rooted in ties of blood and family, not politics and power. Any magic he cannot use suddenly and magically becomes dark. Well, I don't care, James. He has staked us out like a stalking goat in a tiger hunt, and I am tired of our family being a noble sacrifice for his greater good. If I have to be a little less good for my child to not end up another noble sacrifice for Albus Bloody Dumbledore's legend, then so mote it be. Lily railed on her husband, wand in hand. Now, Lils, James said, wrapping both his hands around her wand and using his greater physical strength to force it to the table. Reluctantly, she released her wand, and he wandlessly used telekinesis to slide his wand beside hers on the table. You know, Dumbledore has used his Fidelius charm to make this house unplottable. No one but the secret keeper can share it, and he used one of our marauders to keep it. We are like brothers, They would die before giving us up, or little Harry. James assured her smoothly. He wrapped his arms around her and took in the scent of her hair, feeling himself relax as his power enfolded hers, and her magic smoothed as they began to flow together. Sirius would die before telling them what panties you ordered me from that Muggle lingerie catalogue. I regret showing him. You and Sirius are not trusting Remus nearly as much as you used to since your precious Dumbledore has tried turning him into a spy among the packs. Instead, you entrust it to Peter. Lily spat angrily. Peter is a marauder. Wormtail is as much a marauder as Moony or Padfoot. He even became an animagus with us to help keep Moony safe when his little furry problem came out. James soothed. The weakest of you. Lily muttered, then turned, and her voice went hard again, as this is the weakest house. A cartage. You have Potter Manor with wards holding 1,000 years of paranoid fortification and warding from the first family of war mages in all of Britain, and Dumbledore has us hiding in the weakest possible Potter holding. A vacation cottage whose only protection is the Fidelius charm held by the weakest of the marauders. It is hard not to feel like that goat, tugging at my rope, wondering if the darkness is full of tigers. The wards did not flutter, did not signal, because they were opened by the secret keeper. Wormtail, the wizard known as Peter Pettigrew, was the weakest of the marauders, but the subtlest as well. He was the best spy among them, and the ward breaker of their prankster days. Keyed in to command the wards as the secret keeper, he was able to silence even the alarm that should have triggered when the Morsmord, the dark mark, blazed in the sky above the cottage, blocking all apparition and portkey escape. The first clue the Potters had that they were under attack was when their front door exploded, blowing the kitchen table over and burying the Potters' wands out of reach. Voldemort was inside before the sound of the explosions could die, and his cutting curse lashed out faster than any bullet. But James Potter was a transfiguration generational genius, and the shattered splinters of the furniture had already transformed into so many wooden ravens, 3 shattering under the cutting whip, but 6 more diving in to attack Voldemort. Get Harry and get out. James screamed as he wandlessly transfigured a dozen javelins from the metals of the kitchenware and sent them punching at Voldemort like a company of Roman ballista in ancient war. The ventus that Voldemort had screamed to blast the birds from the air would not stop the dense iron projectiles, but Voldemort used his shadow step to flow out of Their path and beside Lord Potter before he could react. His wand lashed out, and even as James' reflexive Protego Maximus shield formed between them, the one spell that cannot be blocked by any magic at all sounded in the serpentine hiss of parcel magic that intensified the already unstoppable killing curse. Avada Kedavra, Voldemort hissed. The beam of emerald light connected wand to wizard for less than a second, but James Potter and all his transfigurations died at the first touch of the beam. Voldemort stalked to the stairs, climbing them 2 at a time. His true prey was cornered, but he had lost Death Eaters to both Potters before, and knew not to underestimate the Muggle-born witch. Lily ran to the crib, and grabbed the portkey worked into the crib and activated it. In a heartbeat, she and Harry would appear in Grimmauld Place behind the Black family's wards, not as strong as the Potters, but also not nearly as clean or legal, as the Blacks didn't care for law or ethics. Those who came for the black blood could die screaming before the whole of the Wizengamot, and House Black would apologize to no one. Harry was godson of Sirius and blood grandson of Doria Black. Those wards would recognize and defend them even after Dumbledore or Pettigrew had turned traitor. The portkey failed to operate, and Lily could see the green skull with snake emerging from its mouth, dominating the night sky of Godric Hollow. The dark mark blocked all apparition and portkey travel. Snarling, Lily turned to grab the Nimbus matrony broom with the stupid little kiddie seat that Sirius had got them as a joke gift. But Lily kept here for just these emergencies. If she could not teleport out, then she would fly. She had spent the last months of boredom working her own charms, and runes into the broom, notice-me-not charms, disillusionment charms, displacement charms, to make those able to sense the disturbance of air and magic of broom operation, to see the broom as several meters away from its true position. The work was so paranoid, Mad Eye Moody urged her to keep it secret from the rest of the Order of the Phoenix, as it represented a trump card Voldemort should not know about, or be able to counter. Yet there was Penny, James' own elf nanny, the house elf inherited from his mother, who had raised him from a baby, and now took Harry as the next generation with the love and devotion only a house elf could show, standing weeping over the broken brooms and magically sealed window. Only the imperious curse could compel a house elf to act against its family, and no elf who had done so would allow themselves to live afterward. Lily drew her athame from her belt, a witch tool Dumbledore and polite pure-blood society shunned as a remnant of the peasant pagan magic of ancient days, but as much a part of her witchcraft as her wand. Wordlessly, she slammed the blade into Penny's heart, taking the life of the devoted house elf for one final service, as she drew on the ties between house elf magic and the house they were sworn to one last time, even as she felt the imperious curse that Pettigrew had put her elf under die with Penny. She had seconds. She knew James could not match Voldemort alone, and wandless, she tore off Harry's jumper, and with the blood of her sacrificed elf, with 2 generations of devotion willingly surrendered, she painted over his chest 2 runes. Allowing the athame to cut herself and mingle the blood of family, house elf, and mother together, she worked swiftly. Athala, the rune of family. House elf representing the power of the line of the blood of the fathers, the inheritance of the house and family magics. All the magics tied to the House of Potter were woven into the Athala rune, the diamond shaped like a shield on his left chest. Algi's the rune of protection. The form of the rune was that of antler, like the stag and doe forms of their animagi forms. This was Lily's magic, wild magic, witch magic. Muggleborn, whose magic came from the world and the earth, only now tied to the wizarding world and its ancient half-slumbering powers by marriage and her son. She drew that sign on his right chest in the shape of the antlers she and James would never wear again. She could hear Voldemort charging up the stairs. There was no escape, and no power she could stand against Voldemort, so she did the only thing she could. She added it to the sacrifice. With her mingled blood and that of her devoted house elf, she drew the whole of her magic to her, allowing it to flow from her core until there was nothing left. She burned it into his brow until baby Harry screamed. The last rune, the lightning bolt shape of Suelo the Sun rune, the rune of power. Voldemort screamed, Reducto, and the door to the child's room dissolved into dust too fine to easily transfigure into more munitions to fire at him. He stalked in to see this child of prophesy that could be his equal if allowed to live. Stand aside, mudblood. Voldemort sneered. Hissing in defiance like a cobra, Lily shouted back, No, take me instead. My life for his. Voldemort had battled Potter, who at least faced his end like a wizard, fighting for his family like a pure-blooded lord. Now this pathetic muggle-born bitch begged like some helpless victim. She was a shame to the blood she polluted. He was doing House Potter a service by removing any trace of her weakness from noble blood. Avada Kedavra, he hissed, and the bright beam struck her and seemed to pass through her to the child itself. The screaming stopped, and the child gripped its crib and wobbled to its feet to face Voldemort, green eyes blazing with hatred and a bloody wound upon its head, blood staining its chest as well. Staring at the child, Voldemort's legitimacy lanced out, and he could feel not the terror of a child, but the focused rage of a killer. The infant didn't have the berserker of Bellatrix, nor the sadism of Dolohov, but rather the intense, pure focus of his childhood self, the child that looked upon the world that cast aside and persecuted him and swore to make it beg before he allowed it to die. Alone among those he faced tonight, here was his equal. Given time, as little as 2 decades, this child could indeed become his peer if not equal. Harry James Potter, this night I have killed your entire family. Every witch and wizard with a drop of Potter blood died today simply to make sure that my path to you would be clear. Others slaughtered your family. You alone, child of prophesy, are worth my own wand and power. You alone face me without fear or weakness. Know this, when I tell the tale of your death in centuries hence, it will be you alone I speak of without mockery. Saluting with his wand, as if beginning a duel, Voldemort's wand slashed out, and one last time he spoke. Avada Kedavra, Voldemort chanted, and a green blade sliced out to strike the open wound in Harry Potter's head, searing the Suelo rune into his flesh and skull beneath with its power. The power of the ritual Lily's coven had woven to protect mother and child, had been mixed with the power of the House Potter elf, who willingly surrendered power and life to redeem her Imperiused betrayal. Bound with the sacrifice of both power and life of the mother, the magic of witch and elf, of the whole line of families that stretched across generations of birth and death, met the killing curse and shattered. Two screams split the night in Godric's hollow, as a dozen jagged emerald tongues of lightning, like living serpents, lashed out from the boy to the wizard, and the ritual of Voldemort's final Horcrux creation merged with the ritual for Lily's child protection, as magic sought a way to honor all its conflicting commitments. Voldemort's soul split, but rather than bind into the object of power he carried, it bound the child in the Suelo rune that Lily had poured her own life's magic into. Killing curse ravaged Voldemort's body, but the Horcrux creation secured the safety of Voldemort's soul even against the soul-killing curse. A wraith of darkness blasted from the house, tearing the roof and side before it like a dragon of shadow. A baby fell screaming into the blood of its mother. A dark lord fell, undying. A boy lived. A contract lit in an office of Gringotts, and Griphook swore softly. The young Lord Potter. How can a baby not out of diapers have acquired a curse already? Wrapping himself in his best magical protections, for the cruel treaties of wizard kind kept goblins from the surface world, unless called by some wizard lord upon his own business. Goblin magic was not the equal in speed or power of wizard wand magic, but it was its superior in subtlety. Goblins could, if sufficiently motivated, move among the wizards more or less unchecked if there were no wards against them. Taking up his curse-breaking kit, a whole workroom reduced into a bag at his left hip, his right hip held his axe, for to be a goblin above ground was to be a criminal, and no goblin would ever be taken as such alive. Letting the other fellow die was just good business. Getting captured was a good way to activate penalty clauses in your Gringotts employee contract. There was no way generations of hard-won gold would be lost if killing himself or any number of others could prevent it. He drew upon his compass that had a drop of Harry James Potter's blood from his vault registration ceremony and wondered, why in the name of Fenris, Fuzzy Ballsack, is Lord Harry Potter in Little Winging? Any goblin worth his salt had targets they wanted to raid during the next Goblin Rebellion. There would always be a next Goblin Rebellion, but no one wanted to raid Little Winging. Even Upper Winging was safe, because while clearly superior to Little Winging, it had less to offer than a troll's privy and was about half as decorative. If Lord Harry Potter was in Little Winging and somehow cursed, which was still better than being in Little Winging, then so would be Griphook. Professor McGonagall looked at the baby basket left on the Dursleys' doorstep at 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, and shook her head. Albus, are you sure this is for the best? They are the worst sort of muggles imaginable. I really don't think it right they have the boy. He is known to everyone in our world. He is famous. Surely we can do better than this. Professor McGonagall pleaded, her rich Scots brogue thickening with emotion. Dumbledore smiled serenely. He would grow spoiled and arrogant surrounded by that kind of fame. His mother was involved in some very disturbing magic, blood magic, that she worked at her very death. While I cannot condone such magic, it will protect Harry Potter from detection from any in our world as long as he dwells with someone sharing that blood. When the time comes, I will be his guardian in the magical world, and we will shape and educate him into the kind of boy who can be a symbol of hope against the rising of the Dark Lord. Dumbledore said confidently, "You are sure he will return?" McGonagall said fretfully, "All this has been foretold. The Dark Lord will return, and under my guidance, Harry Potter will be ready to complete the sacrifice of his family and end the threat of he who must not be named forever." Dumbledore said smugly, "For the boy will have no one but Dumbledore to turn to, no one but Dumbledore to teach him, and will know no more of his fate than Dumbledore chooses to allow him. There will be no second Grindwald rising. Number Harry will not be the power to reshape the world. That power could only be trusted to Albus Dumbledore, champion of the light. If a child must be sacrificed for the greater good, well, Dumbledore would offer his remorse at Harry's tombstone. He had made so many offerings at so many tombstones it had stopped actually hurting over a war ago. Griphook looked at the boy, left beside the milk cartons, like another delivery. 6 bottles of milk, and the heir to a most ancient and noble house. He should be happy the small children muggles used instead of post owls to deliver papers hadn't buried the child under a thrown newspaper as well. Goblins were cruel. Life was cruel. Goblins murdered, tortured, and plundered, but if there was one thing that goblins did not do, they did not abandon children. Goblins would raid and slaughter other clans. Warriors and matrons would die to the last goblin to defend their gold and their children. But while the goblins would indeed steal every last nut and sickle of their enemy's gold, the children would likewise be stolen as the true prizes of the raid. A goblin child taken in raid was lucky and would be educated, equipped, armed, and dowered as any child of the house. You did not throw away children. Griphook took his axe in hand and prepared to kick in the door to 4 Privet Drive. He would simply kill the muggles and take the child for his own. He was keeper of the Potter accounts and charged with his protection anyway. Decision made, he stepped forward, axe at the ready to cleave the door when he passed the blood wards Dumbledore had leeching off the boy to protect the house. As soon as he did, the cold foulness of the Horcrux washed over him, and he nearly dropped his axe. Griphook looked with horror as the baby writhed in agony under a mufflato spell silencing his screams. There were 3 magics at war in the boy: a baby's own wild magic, some sort of witch blood magic, and something more evil than any curse he had ever seen, like a living, intelligent parasite striving to consume the boy. All of it was swirling around the rune in the boy's head. A Swalo rune, the sun rune, the power rune. This was not man magic. This was woman magic. The sun rune banished darkness, and whatever was powering it would not last through a turning of the sun. This was witch magic, without goblin silver to anchor it, and without a wizarding rune array to stabilize it, it would fade, and whatever it was containing would be free to devour the child. Griphook would have failed his contract, and his whole family would pay the default fee to protect the goblin nation. Blood and gold is the price of an oath broken. His family would be slaughtered, and the gold of generations would be given to the sarding politicians of the wizard Wittergamot to fight over with no sitting Lord Potter to defend it. Loss of honor and loss of gold. 2 fates worse than death, although death would also be in there. Gringotts contracts terminated by axe, dagger, or dragon. No, Griphook knew that he was standing on the deck of a burning ship, and standing on the deck of a burning ship, the only choice was to charge and take the enemies. Either you died in glory or slaughtered to victory. If you were going to die, you should always die trying to win something. The only thing here was a child, therefore, Griphook would win the child. Or rather, Frithweaver, his mate, could. Without a second thought, he scooped up the child and portkeyed back to his home in the caverns under Gringotts. Frithweaver stared at Griphook, holding a living, breathing tornado of soul and blood magic. Brought across her own wards into the home, she defended for her own children, and considered if her marriage dagger might need sheathing in Griphook's empty head. How dare you bring that cursed thing into our house? The magic inside it is more powerful than the deepest vaults of the founders in the bank. Together, even with our lives, we could not protect our children from it inside our own wards. Frithweaver hissed. Griphook pulled the wrappings away, showing the human boy. This is Harry James Potter, and I am his account manager. His entire family was slaughtered today, and his mother's own life is bound in that rune holding that dark soul magic at bay. It is witch blood magic, and will not hold past dawn. If he dies, my contract with his house and my contract with the Goblin Nation is forfeit, and our whole family faces sanction. Goblins are cold, cruel, greedy. These are the slurs that wizards hurl against them. When pressed, they will admit that goblins are also honest, loyal to their own, hardworking, and above all, fearless. Goblin magic is bound in silver. Goblin silver is created by the merger of goblin magic and silver in an alchemical process that yields a very small amount per session. This is why goblin-made weapons are not sold, but leased to wizards and kings for only one lifetime, because the work of several generations went into crafting a single sword blade, and no amount of gold could take that from the Goblin Nation for more than a single generation. Goblins did not use wands. They were forbidden by law. Goblin warriors used runes in their weapons to focus their magic. Goblin women did not have the training to work runes into great blades or larger ward structures, because their magic was imbuing runes into the bodies of goblin children to focus their magics internally and externally. No goblin male could work that combination of blood and goblin magic to imbue goblin silver into flesh runes, but it was a part of goblin family magic, taught mother to daughter since the days before the rise of man. Working swiftly, for the fate of her family rode on it, and with the skill and precision of a rune master, a title given grudgingly by the goblin nation, Frithweaver began to work her own family silver, the silver she had set aside and blessed for her next child. She began to work the silver and her power into the burned Soelo scar in the boy's forehead. The dark magic fought her, causing her to burn 2 stamina potions and a clear mind draft to overcome the fear and exhaustion to bind her family magic to the magic of the mother. Together, they bound the third magic, the magic of a soul not the boy's, and bound it into submission, weaving it into the blood and bone, soul and power of the child. As Frithweaver worked, she felt the power of 2 more runes upon the boy and cried out in despair. Drawing her wedding dagger, she pulled the goblin silver from the blade itself to fill the 2 other runes she had not noticed because the blood had been smeared. Family and protection, Othala and Algiz. The human child now lay with 3 runes of goblin silver in his human flesh, his own power, the sacrificed power of his witch mother, the stolen power of his enemy, and somehow binding and blending them together, a whisper of elf magic. "The child will live," Griphook said in wonder. "The child is an abomination. If the wizards knew what we have wrought this night, they would burn the child in fiendfire to blot all trace of it away." Frithweaver said softly, "That would remove our obligations under the contract." Griphook mused. "He is marked by me with the rights of my mother. He is bound to our house with the blade of our marriage knife. Griphook, I give you my son, Harry James Potter, son of Griphook, of the Hematite clan." Frithweaver said in tones of naked threat that should have sounded ridiculous from a goblin female who had spent so much of her power this night she could not even stand. Still, she had claimed the child by blood and power. To harm him, she would have to be killed first. He grinned the wide-fanged grin of a predator. He had married well. What she had taken, he would defend. "I see my son, Harry James Potter, son of Griphook of the Hematite clan." Griphook drew his own knife, cut baby Harry's palm, and slapped the hilt in his hand. The baby angrily closed his hand on the knife and refused to let it go. Griphook laughed. They let him fall asleep holding the knife. Goblin runes marked him, and inside goblin wards they would drink the power of his family, weaving it into his flesh, even as the strange powers in him would weave themselves into his wards and his own family in return. Already he could feel his wards singing. Goblin magic and human magic didn't mesh, but both used runes. Elves did not use runes, but they lived off of human magic and made something other than human with it. This boy had all 3 bound in him, and something dark and unholy as well. If the wizards would burn him with fiendfire because he wasn't human, goblins had a simpler view. To Griphook, Frithweaver, their son Fangborn and daughter Glitterbright, he was simply theirs. What a goblin took a goblin held. Harry was theirs. For 10 years, Albus Percival Wilfrid Brian Dumbledore used every art and device in his power to locate Harry Potter. It was with something between shock and relief that he noted the Book of Acceptance write out his name in the list of students. Harry Potter lived and would be coming to Hogwarts. Why in the name of Merlin's left, Saggy Ball was the letter addressed to Gringotts? Chapter 2. Age 5, Noodle Harry and Glitterbright ran. The elder goblin sister and her humanly challenged baby brother were using the time bought by Fangborn to escape the gang of goblin youths determined to eliminate the stain of a wizard born polluting the caverns of the nation. Fangborn, son of Griphook, was a powerful goblin youth and advanced in his warrior training. But against 6 youths of the same age, all he could do was buy them moments to run. Glitterbright was a strong and bright goblin girl of 8, dragging a night-blind baby brother of 5 from those who wished to murder him. She had a very small knife, for the process of laying down goblin silver to make a marriage knife began as a young goblin maiden first learned to touch her magic, and marked her first chance to begin to craft the rune work that made the goblin control of magic. The knife was no longer than an adult goblin's finger, and scant use against the short swords of the goblin youths. If not the weapons of power that would threaten an adult wizard, they were enough to end the life of the children being chased. We have to get to the wards, Harry. No goblin woman is unarmed within the wards of her home. If we get to our wards, we are safe. Glitterbright whispered to Harry. Harry was trying to be a good goblin and be brave. He remembered the stories of the Wars of Shame, when Rome had driven the goblins from the face of the world. The wand magic pioneered by the Romans had been more than the goblins' silver weapons could match upon the surface. When they were driven into the caverns by a Roman Empire determined to end the scourge, they met not simply goblin warriors, but the goblin men and women behind the wards woven by the women. And while proud legions marched into the tunnels, terrified survivors escaped from them. No goblin woman beneath her wards feared any creature living. They simply needed 2 more turns of the passage to be safe. They found Snarltooth and Grimnir tapping their short swords, blocking the next turn. Let the wizard-born go. There is no need to die with him. For all that you deserve punishment for bringing such filth into the caverns of the nation, it isn't worth clan war. His blood is enough. Harry went to pull his hand from Glitterbright. He loved his sister, and a goblin warrior's job was to die before one hair on a goblin maiden's head was harmed. Glitterbright's claws dug deep into his hands, drawing blood as she refused to release him. The job of a goblin woman was to shed the last drop of her blood and magic before a child of clan came to harm. Let me go. They won't hurt you if you leave, Harry cried. We take no thing unearned, but what we have taken we defend to the last drop of our blood, swore Glitterbright as she dashed away from the 2 goblin youths, using her power to slash through the warning wards blocking the tunnels. The wards were to block children and alert adults that these tunnels held dangers that could kill. The tunnels the goblins had been driven to were not safe, even for them, and only the skill and savagery of the nation had kept them alive since being driven underground. Still, danger ahead, death behind. There was no safe choice. The cruel laughter of goblin children sounded behind them, as more than simply 2 pairs of feet followed them, the original attackers having joined the blocking pair in their pursuit. Harry heard hissing sounds coming from the darkness and the cracks surrounding the tunnels. Prey comes, many prey. My children will not starve. My mate will be avenged. Kill the goblins, the voice hissed. Glitterbright drew up sharply, her goblin vision showing her the great black serpent rising from the darkness, a dozen lesser shapes writhing from the shadows to all sides. Rock vipers, whimpered Glitterbright, the magical snakes being second in danger only to the basilisk in the Underdark of Europe. The magical snakes were protected by scales that could turn anything beneath the full-strength rune blades of a grown goblin warrior and resist any but the most potent wizard spells. Their venom was not impossible to counter, but you had less than a minute to get the potion into the victim before death was painfully inevitable. You will not harm my sister, Harry hissed as the parsley tongue fell instinctively from his lips as he faced the mother serpent. Speaker, we will not harm a speaker, nor those you name your speaker's kin, but my children and I starve, locked in the tunnels by the goblin warriors. They must have food, or soon they will starve, and I would rather damn myself by striking a speaker than watch my children starve. The rock viper mother hissed. Glitterbright drew Harry behind herself, the tiny knife not a third of the length of the great snake's fang, and utterly incapable of piercing its skin. At that point 6 goblins, all who had been able to run when they had beaten Fangborn down, burst from the darkness, blades in hand, and cruel laughter at the coming slaughter in their throats. Kill them. Kill all the others. I will cut their flesh so that your smallest child may grow strong and fat on their meat if you kill them all, Harry hissed. Griphook and 10 of his clan pounded down the halls, clad in armor, long rune-worked goblin silver blades, capable of carving through the strongest wizard shield, or deflecting anything less than the killing curse, charged around the corner of the tunnel, expecting to find 2 of his children's corpses with nothing but vengeance to be taken. Instead, he found the largest rock viper he had ever seen, stretched obscenely, as if it had eaten something 3 times its own size, curled up lazily in the middle of the cavern, while his daughter Glitterbright carved flesh from painfully contorted goblin child corpses, and his youngest son Harry hissed at a collection of black-scaled rock vipers that swayed before him, being fed bits of goblin meat. Griphook sheathed his blades and bade his clansmen wait back as he advanced slowly to his children. Daughter, I had thought to avenge you, and find you instead clad in victory and blood. Explain. Griphook snarled softly. Glitterbright didn't look up, but continued carving goblin flesh from her attackers and passing it to Harry, who continued to feed the serpents, one of whom was wrapped around his neck and staring at Griphook from where he waved beside Harry's face. Harry told the rock vipers not to hurt me and promised that if they killed all our enemies, we would cut them up into pieces the little ones could eat. Glitterbright announced, as if butchering goblins for one of the greatest predators of the deeps was simply the logical thing to do. Harry looked up and petted the snake around his neck. "This is Noodle, Father. He wants to come home with me. He promises to bite anyone who bothers us as long as he can borrow my body heat. He doesn't like the cold." Griphook looked at the mother serpent, whose mate had taken a dozen goblin warriors to kill, and who had just defended his 2 children from a killing he would have been too late to prevent. "Bargained well and done. Let us see to this contract's payment promptly. Blood and gold should always be repaid promptly," Griphook said, smiling at his children. Pride swelling his chest and tears misting his eyes, he drew his own knife to speed the butchery. "May your vaults flow with gold, and your fangs with blood, protector of my children. I offer the caverns of my clan to you and your children if you will continue to protect those of my blood." Griphook spoke as he addressed the mother serpent. Harry turned and hissed a translation without thought, and the great rock viper bowed her head, then crawled close to taste his skin with her tongue, then nodded again, having taken the scent of his clan's blood. Turning to Harry, he ruffled his unruly hair. "I've won a strong ally for the clan. The silver of their weapons is yours and your sister's." Harry beamed up at his father. Then when Noodle head buted him, Harry head buted his snake back, and the two began hissing at each other. "Noodle," Griphook mused. How in the name of Gringotts the Bloody was he supposed to work Noodle into a warrior epic poem for his son? Maybe it sounded better in English. Griphook snorted. No, Goblin or English, Noodle sounded like something that belonged in Soup Knot Saga. Harry was never going to be a normal goblin, Griphook mused, nor would he be a weak one. Age 10. Cauldron Conundrum. Harry was not going to cry. Goblin warriors did not cry. Goblin warriors made swords of goblin silver as long as they were, and hammered runes into them with the layered intent that made goblin silver impossible to transfigure, to corrode or destroy with normal wizard magic. All goblin males began layering their goblin silver over their knife as soon as they could touch their magic, and by age 10 they had at least a functional short sword that could cut through the finest muggle steel like butter. Goblin women only layered enough goblin silver to make the marriage knife that would be their tool for rune working on wards and the flesh weaving of the family magic. The worst insult of a goblin warrior was to be called a short knife, as a goblin without the power to become a warrior would not grow his blade beyond the knife of a woman, and never be able to wield the magical power a goblin should channel through it. The young goblins were beginning to whisper Harry was a short knife, because his blade was just a very strong dagger, a fighting knife, but no sword. Potion Master Feverthorn poured a glass of fire whiskey for both Griphook and Frithweaver as he regarded the parents of his most promising pupil across his desk, and smiled with teeth carefully covered, as this was an emotionally charged discussion. "Young Harry is not a short knife, nor am I keeping him behind because of any lack of skill in brewing. In all honesty, I have never met a goblin, myself included, who has the power to imbue potions equal to that of young Harry. When he began, he was a problem student, not because he had trouble with any of the meticulous disciplines of potion preparation and brewing, but because when I teach goblin children to push as hard as they could to begin to learn to bind their power to potions, to make them more than simply muggle chemistry, about half of them were able to push and control their magic outside their body, without a runic construct with enough intent to bind and transform the potion in a meaningful way. And half failed to do even that. Harry, on the other hand, pushed in so much power that the bruise failed to contain it, and he melted down enough cauldrons that he earned the nickname of Popping, a play on his wizard name. Harry hung his head in shame, causing Noodle to slide from his sleeves and ram gently into the side of his head to demand petting. Frithweaver and Griphook looked relieved. They were proud of their odd human son, but worried when he could not grow the blade of manhood that way other goblins could. Potion Master Feverthorn sipped his own fire whiskey and breathed a short puff of flame and mused softly. It is well that it was Harry and not Glitterbright with this problem, or we might not have noticed the obvious answer. Frithweaver, reacting to the suggestion of racism in the contrasting of her human and goblin children, felt her hand going to her own marriage knife, and her magic snarled and snapped about her, leaving visible sparks. What are you implying, Potion Master? And choose your next words carefully. Frithweaver snarled, dangerous as any goblin mother when her children were questioned. Glitterbright is a goblin maiden. She would never expect to grow her magical focus beyond that of the marriage knife, because goblin maidens and matrons' magic is proven in the weaving and control of the wards in flesh and bone, metal and stone. Theirs is the subtle manipulation and crafting. No one would have noticed that Glitterbright could not grow her blade any more. That would be expected. No, if Harry had been a girl, we would have simply wondered why she could not see the flow of the wards the way any goblin maiden would, and had to rely on arithromancy to determine the required balance and shape of a ward pattern like a goblin warrior or human wizard. Harry is neither a goblin warrior whose focus is the sword of Goblin Sivler that grows with his power and knowledge, nor a goblin maiden whose focus is the very wards of her hearth and home. He is a wizard born. His focus will be a wand. Potion Master Feverthorn concluded smugly. A wand, blinked Frithweaver. But he has our runes woven into his flesh, amplifying his magic like any goblin of the clan, maid, or warrior. Wizards don't do that. Griphook smiled, his teeth baring in a predator's threat. Lord Potter was a famed aura, a wizard warrior strong enough that Voldemort had to kill him himself. Lady Potter was far more powerful and dangerous in her own way, ruthless enough to be a goblin in her own right. If our Harry has the power woven into his flesh by his mother's sacrifice, Voldemort's soul fragment, and our own goblin rune magic, and still focused through the wizard's magical amplifier of their damned wands, how strong do you think he will be? Potion Master Feverthorn smiled his own fanged grin. I think I am happy I will not be paying to replace the cauldrons and castle that our young Harry will blow up as he learns again, to try to fit the power of a dragon into the spell structure or potion formula designed for a baby duck. Three goblins laughed the laugh of goblins, finding an exploitable loophole in a contract or enemy caught unarmed. One wizard goblin child blushed, and one noodle head buted his idiot speaker who stopped petting before Noodle was done being ignored. Age 11. You know what, for you know who. Hagrid chatted merrily to young Harry Potter, who looked on in horror, and whose snake Noodle hissed in outright hilarity as the keeper of keys and grounds in Hogwarts proceeded to blab every secret he had ever been within earshot of to a goblin wizard he had just met without any prompting or sign of slowing down. Turning in horror to Fangborn, his brother who drove the cart, he whispered in Goblin, "Tell me all wizards are not this stupid." He has just told me that the small object in his pocket is the most dangerous and valuable thing given to Dumbledore because no one else could defend it from Voldemort, and that any pickpocket with half a brain or assassin still with his training knife could take it any time while he is taking me shopping for my school supplies. Fangborn laughed softly, ignoring Hagrid's muttered, "Shouldn't have said that." That somehow failed to stop his non-stop blurting of secrets, and replied in quiet goblin, "This one is far larger and stupider than your average wizard. Dumbledore is supposedly the wisest and most powerful wizard of the Light faction. However, this wise and powerful wizard gave his greatest secret and the protection of his prophesied savior boy, who lived to this giant security risk, so assume you are going to have to take steps to secure your own safety," Fangborn said grimly. Striding from Gringotts to take Harry shopping in the wizard's Diagon Alley, Hagrid was an excellent tour guide, if the greatest single argument against wizard security consciousness the young goblin had ever seen. You will be needing a trunk, of course, to hold all the cauldrons and books and whatnot, then your robes and books, and last your wand. Can't be a wizard without your wand, Hagrid said, although he winced at the end and finally stopped his usual roaring boom and subsided into pained muttering, as if recalling something especial shameful or traumatic. At least he was done booming his secrets for everyone in 100 meters. I do not need a trunk, cauldron, or robes. My clan has seen me outfitted as befits a son of Griphook. By wizarding law, we are forbidden to walk above ground unless called by a lord of house, or at direction of a ministerial undersecretary or better. I will require books and a wand. Harry spoke firmly, knowing Hagrid was about as distractible as one of the goblin younglings he had charge of during his duty hours in the clan creche. Hagrid looked upon the tight aisles of Flourish and Blots and determined that Harry could be left alone for his book shopping. Piling his first-year course books onto the trolley hidden in his shrinkable trunk, Harry began looking for the books on arithromancy, rune lore, advanced potions, and enchantments that were what human wizards learned to replicate what goblins did with their own magic. Those books are meant for third years, not for first years. I had to ask myself, because they looked very interesting and more similar to what I know than any of the spell books we have for first year. A young girl's voice sounded behind him like a tiny librarian crossed with a squirrel. Turning around, Harry found himself confronted with another human, a witch whose physical appearance did nothing to dispel the impression her voice gave of a tiny librarian crossed with a squirrel. She had prominent front teeth like a squirrel or beaver, and a great untamable mass of hair like some small forest creature. Yet her eyes and face had the focus and determination of a goblin maiden, whose bearing told the rowdiest goblin boy that he spoke with a future mistress of clan, not a tavern wench, and should pay her due respect and attention lest not all of his body be found. I'm Hermione Granger, Muggle-born. I had no idea I was even a witch until I got my Hogwarts letter, although it explains a lot of things that had been strange that happened around me. I dug ever so deep in science to explain them, but not everything fit. I suppose you know all about that, being a wizard born yourself. The young witch babbled with a direct and uncomplicated stream of consciousness, so different from Hagrid's broken meanderings that Harry had to grin. Harry Potter, son of Griphook of the Hematite clan, of Gringotts and the Goblin Nation, at your service. I am sorry to report that any of the spells in first year are going to be at least as much a mystery to me as to you. Goblins don't really do spells because we can't use wands. We can use runes and potions. There is lots of magic you can do without a wand or knowing any spells at all. That is what these books are for, Harry said, gesturing at his runes and arithromancy books. I was told we aren't allowed to do magic outside of school until we are of age. Something about the statute of secrecy. Hermione frowned. Harry, his goblin rage ignited by memory of the laws designed to keep the most ancient and noble houses of the wizards on top, and everyone else crushed into powerless poverty, began his rant. Those laws exist to keep the pure-blooded elite in power, as their children can do as much magic behind their wards as they want, making their children by far the best performing in school, and able to secure the best positions after graduation, because they have been learning and practicing non-stop their entire lives, and you are only allowed those few hours of class, only in school, for 7 years. Harry snarled, his snake noodle rousing at his rage and sliding from his sleeve, seeing only a little squirrel girl staring back at his speaker, evidently no threat. Hermione's eyes went wide. She was raised by liberal dentists who took pains to point out to her the privilege she was raised in and the social inequalities of the Muggle world. To find out that the wizarding world was not only as bad, but as much worse as pre-revolution France under the bloated and corrupt aristocracy roused her to matching fury. That is horrible. That isn't fair. How are we supposed to compete against that? Hermione raged. Harry opened his book and showed the young Muggle-born witch. This is rune lore, something developed by goblins and stolen by wizards. It requires magical power to infuse, but the ability to craft and empower an array is based on hard-won knowledge that comes from hundreds of hours of study and discipline, of meditation and fine focus on control. This is what goblin maidens train on since learning to read, and the basis of the wards of Gringotts that are strong enough every wizard trusts them with their gold. You don't need a wand to learn it. You need intelligence and effort. Hermione looked at the runes and the dense text describing their theory and practice, finding the sort of structured knowledge she had sought intellectual refuge in the sciences and law. She was starting to calm down from her tear-stained rage into something more of a growing plan. Hermione liked plans, when Harry dropped another book on her. This is arithromancy, It uses mathematics to describe the relationships of magic to reality and the interactions of power in reshaping the universe. While goblin maidens and matrons have the innate sense of these relationships, goblin men and wizards have to use math to map out those relations to show how power can be contained, can be focused, and how it must be shaped to make a desired effect, whether it is a ward, a charm, a transformation, or a simple shaped elemental effect work. Hermione blinked, but that isn't taught until at least third year, and it's optional at that. Magical theory isn't even optional until the fourth year after you have a full year of arthromancy successfully completed at least exceptional, Hermione said, already suspecting the flaw in the planned curriculum. Harry sneered. Right, so no one gets taught how magic theoretically works until the year before they do their owls and determine their ability to even enter the newts required for higher careers. Meanwhile, the pureblood children are raised from infancy being taught how magic works, why it works, and by the time Muggle-born, half-bloods, and goblin raised get a chance to learn how everything works, the doors to the esteemed professions are already closed against them. Hermione opened the arithromancy text and began to read. This is just math, and honestly not even that advanced. I mean, I studied calculus and statistics, dabbled a little bit in thermodynamics in both chemistry and physics, but this seems like a fairly dumbed-down version. Hermione mused. Harry grinned. I studied under a senior account manager at Gringotts. I was doing math tougher than this before my mother stopped bathing me. How hard do you think those pureblood kids have been working since they already know the system is rigged so they always win? Hermione matched the grin. Not nearly as hard as I do. She frowned. Still, Hogwarts seems geared to let the purebloods win. Even working our hardest, if the system is that rigged, how far can we get? Harry slid out the last book, one not on any recommended list from Hogwarts, one written by the Goblin Nation itself and translated into English for the children of Gringotts Cursebreakers and other valued human allies. Hogwarts Houses, a study in paths to power. Hermione read the title, then looked up to Harry. There are 4 houses. Gryffindor is for those who seek conflict and challenge as their path to power. This house is where warriors are drawn, but honestly for the purebloods it is a path to power. For the muggle-born and half-bloods, it is a chance to be cannon fodder to win glories for their more advantaged brethren. Ravenclaw, the house of knowledge, for those who seek knowledge as their path to power. This would sound like a good place, but this is wizard knowledge. So as much as the house supports the acquisition of knowledge, they also know it as their competitive advantage, and those purebloods with access to family knowledge and libraries will never share that and dilute their own advantage. Slytherin, the house of the cunning and ambitious. That would sound like a good fit, except it is the house of the pureblood fanatics, those who use privilege as a weapon and advantage as armor. They are the most invested in keeping outsiders down. Neither you nor I would find any support there. Hufflepuff, the house of the hardworking. Hufflepuffs are known as the house for everyone else. They have the worst reputation because they will take those who value something other than climbing over others at all costs to succeed. Hufflepuffs value loyalty and hard work. Hufflepuffs don't require you be the best to get in their halls. They require you give your best while you are in them. Hufflepuffs don't pride themselves on the advantages they bring, but on what they earn with their own sweat, blood, and tears. Hermione gripped the book and read the description of Hufflepuff and the examples of successful and famous Hufflepuffs. For a house deemed as the also-rans, a house of the unexceptional, they nurtured just as many famous talents as the other houses, but talents that rose to the top on their own merits and the power of the friendships they built along the way, not family connections. This is our house. This is the house we can succeed in, Hermione said fiercely, jotting down the titles of Harry's books on a scrap of parchment. Harry grinned at her. Learn all of this before you get to Hogwarts, and you will be ready to show those purebloods to be afraid of a muggle-born witch. Hermione grinned back. Or a goblin. Hagrid could only smile when Harry waved at the young witch as they exited the bookstore and headed for Ollivander's for a wand. The explosions were bad enough that Harry was wearing his dragonhide gloves. 2 wands had shattered in his hands. Several others had exploded nearby shelves and plants. One had conjured a niffler that raided the cash box for 20 galleons before it escaped. Ollivander's hair was smoking slightly as he eyed the young goblin critically. "Mr. Potter, might I be correct in assuming that you have undergone at least your beginning family rituals, and you bear more than the single rune of power on your forehead?" Ollivander asked. Harry's heart sunk, and he opened his robes to show the glowing Othala and Alge's runes on his chest to match the Soelo of his curse scar. 3 runes of power. Normally a wizard would not see that level of amplification unless he had undergone at least half a dozen dark rituals to magnify his body, mind, and spirit. Those rituals have been banned since Grindwald, and the only one ever to dabble in them since was. Ollivander broke off and turned to Harry speculatively. "I wonder." He ran to the back and came out with a wand box covered in dust. "Try this, Mr. Potter." This wand has a phoenix feather core from a phoenix that has only ever given one other feather. That feather was the core of the wand of the most powerful wizard I ever sold a wand to. A wizard that went as far down paths forbidden to wizard kind as your goblin runes have left you. Ollivander smiled, a bare-toothed smile the young goblin recognized as the warning it was. Taking up the wand, he felt his runes flood with power. He felt his body grow warm, and his skin to burn with a golden light he associated with a closing rune array or settling enchantment. With a quiet whisper, he spoke, "Lumos." The dark of the store was ravaged by a light so powerful it hurt even through closed lids and an upraised arm. The wand sang with Harry's power, and his core sang back in joy. A blunt black head slammed into his temple and a noodle hissed. "SSS, stop that. It hurts and you are just showing off anyway." Harry grinned. Sure, he was again having control issues, but he had a wand that could handle all of his power and more. Bring on Hogwarts. Chapter 3, Once Upon a Train. Chapter 3, Once Upon a Train. Diagon Alley had been crowded beneath overhanging eaves and long shadows. The press of buildings and people had been enough that Harry could ignore the strangeness of the overworld. The trip through the city with Hagrid had driven Harry into blind panic. The cavern had no roof. The clouds had made it possible to ignore the reality, with the force of will required to ignore the rapidly degrading ward, and the power to exterminate everyone within 500 meters long enough to complete the rune replacement and prevent said explosion. The clouds parted as Hagrid rambled on again about how Dumbledore himself had requested Fluffy to help guard the you-know-what from you-know-who, which was supposedly a secret, although with his continued mention of 3 heads and shouldn't have said that, Harry was sure Fluffy was either a Cerebus, 3-headed dog that is indeed Fluffy, or a Runespore, 3-headed snake that is definitely not Fluffy. Had Harry convinced that staying within 100 yards of Hagrid would get any Gringotts warrior danger pay, from a race that considered dying on the job to be part of the standard contract? The clouds parted, and Harry began to shake. There was no roof. The sky loomed above him worse than any abyss of the deeps, because no matter how far you fell down, you would be crushed eventually on uncaring stone. The bones of the earth were always beneath you, and its heart-burning blood would reduce you to the components from which you were formed faster than the gentle embrace of the Earth Mother, but just as irrevocably. The sky had no end. Harry began to stumble, heart hammering, sweat breaking out on his face. He was having trouble breathing. The sky, the endless, pitiless blue emptiness that Harry knew gave out only to airless black space, where no magic dwelled, no air, no wards of magnetism to keep you from the dragon's breath that was solar wind. A cold beyond cold, fire beyond flame, and emptiness beyond death opened above him without a single stone to protect him. Hagrid, oblivious rather than uncaring, placed a big shovel paw behind his back and shoved him into the train station of Platform 9. Pressed into the harsh and ignorant crowd of rude shoving people, with the clash and clamor of sounds and the looming roofs of a busy train station, Harry could feel himself begin to relax. No goblin child had been outside a cavern since the 1700 and the lost Third Goblin Rebellion. They told stories in the caverns of goblin villages, mixed villages of goblins and wizards before the Statue of Secrecy enshrined the rise of the most ancient and noble houses, and the concentration of wealth and power that entailed. It hadn't been real. They had the Star Cavern, which young goblin lovers would stroll beneath to talk of things beyond blood and gold, contract and feud, but on some level you knew the magic was projected on stone. Goblins lived and died under tons of stone. Deep within the earth are Mother and her magic. Father Sky was a half-remembered and forgotten relative, sung of on most ancient saga, but you never expected to meet him on the way to a ruddy train station. No one told him how vast was the sky and how small a goblin. Hagrid didn't notice. Half giant and all oblivious, he probably didn't care. Hagrid wandered off to see a fella about a bird, leaving Harry on the platform with no real idea how to get to platform 9-3. I mean, sure, go 3/4 of the way past platform 9 towards 10 and you should be near, but it had wizard wards, not comfortable goblin ones. How was he supposed to tell? Noodle, I need your eyes. Harry hissed in Parselmouth, causing his rock viper to slither out his left sleeve and taste the air. Half blind, all stupid goblin boy. You are lucky you are warm and useful for moving upstairs without making me scrape things. You are lucky I hate you less than slithering home in the rain. Noodle hissed, being the well-behaved and adoring familiar that he was. Noodle tasted the air with his tongue and tugged him farther left. It was more accurately described as platform 9 2/3. Either that represented a degree of security consciousness that Hagrid being sent for secret things tended to deny, or a level of mathematics sloppiness that explained Gringotts' monopoly on wizard banking. This being his way to school, Harry was beginning to fear for his educational future. Passing through the gate onto the platform, he saw Hermione Granger observing a stoop-shouldered boy being lectured by a rather formidable ancient witch wearing a stuffed buzzard as a hat. The buzzard was eyeing Hermione with deep suspicion, and in turn, Hermione was eyeing something in the boy's hands with equal suspicion. Witches and wizards, and child version of the same, were greeting each other with the styled disinterested formality of the pure-blood elite, and the happy over-expressive chaos of muggle-born and raised children. Hermione, of course, was entirely too much Hermione to be bothered with either, or really notice why she should. Harry, that boy isn't wearing gloves, Hermione said, going so far as to point her wand at him, causing two auras to draw and point at her in the sort of reflex that sprayed bits of girl all over a train station. Noodle struck like lightning and disarmed Hermione, holding her wand under its fangs and hissing at her as she frowned at Noodle, and every adult head turned to her. The jagged lighting surrounding the lecturing ancient witch with the boy argued she was not planning on stunning Hermione for her faux pas. Morgana's tasty tits Hermione. A wand is a weapon. You point it at people in a crowd, and you will be lucky if they find enough to bury you. If Noodle hadn't taken your wand away, that witch with the ugly hat would have left nothing but bushy hair and a smoking pile of cremated Granger. Harry said as two auras, a steaming mad witch, and confused boy with a toad converged on them. Explain yourself this instant, said the old witch, wand still sparkling, but held in a duelist off-line position 30 degrees off target and low, ready to snap and release in one motion. The auras, on some signal known only to them, had now positioned to face the confronting groups just off-line of each other so they could observe, evade, and if need be, fire on either at need. I am Hermione Granger, Muggle-born witch, and I was pointing out to my goblin friend that I was observing a young boy working with a dangerous animal without gloves. He could be poisoned. In fact, he most probably is poisoned. But I haven't covered any medical textbooks, so I can't really tell how serious it is. Hermione charged ahead with total obliviousness to the hand of the aura that clamped down on her shoulder, intent on arresting her. Now see here, you are as clearly mistaken that this animal is dangerous as that boy is a goblin. While I admit he lacks the noble bearing of the most ancient and noble house of Longbottom that my Neville has, he isn't goblin ugly. Now you will explain why you have drawn your wand on the heir of an ancient and noble house, or I will see your wand broken and your expulsion before you even reach Hogwarts. Augusta Longbottom, Witch of Witches, boomed angrily. Harry learned diplomacy from his father at the same time he learned assassination from his mother, and was reasonably certain Hermione knew neither. For that reason, he decided to be the token goblin of sense in this escalating drama. Taking Lady Longbottom's wand, holding right hand in his own, he bent down and brushed his lips over her scarred knuckles with the wizard courtesies his mother had beaten into him. If her son was both wizard and goblin, he would not bring shame to her hearth in either world. Herr Potter, son of Griphook of Gringotts, greets Dowager Longbottom. As a young warrior apprentice of the clan Hematite, it has been my pleasure to clean the heads of the 100. I have many times cleaned the head of Gorm Longbottom, who came to raid England and the goblin village of Clume in 893. Harry said, looking up into the burning eyes of Augusta Longbottom, easily as fierce as his own mother. Neville's eyes grew wide. The aura said a really dirty thing Harry promised himself to look up later, because it sounded too foul not to use at some point, and Hermione looked shocked. You boast of being an enemy of my house, and a goblin, even though you also claim to be Harry Potter, heir presumptive of House Potter. Augusta claimed, not reclaiming her hand. The heads of the 100 are the center of the clan temple, where the ashes of our fallen lie in state before being returned to the earth. Only 100 heads, the 100 greatest enemies the clan has ever fought, rest in this temple. In over 1,000 years, there have never been even 100 warriors the equal of Gorm Longbottom, and 1,000 years' worth of goblin warriors have heard the glory song of his final battle. My father would be well pleased to hear that the blood of the Longbottoms runs swift and hot as in ancient days. Harry said, for goblins didn't just nurse grudges, they petted them, fed and watered them, and sung them to sleep every night. Enemies like that didn't come around every century. They must be cherished. That was reasonably well spoken for a goblin. What is this nonsense about gloves and wand waving? Augusta said, relaxing out of execution and expulsion mode and into Mother's best mode of talk fast enough and it might be chores not lashes. Harry resolved to talk fast. My muggle-born friend here, while ignorant of the perceived threat of a pointed wand, is both wise and concerned for the well-being of her fellow students, and noticed that the boy beside you was carrying a dangerous toxic creature in his bare hands without any form of protection. She was justly concerned for his health and well-being, and out of justifiable concern for his health, acted injudiciously and forgot her wand was in her hand when she pointed out the suppression toad. Harry said, "What?" Came from Neville, Augusta, and one of the two auras. Merlin's left saggy nut. I think it is. Came from the second aura, releasing Hermione's shoulder in shock. Hermione, as if triggered into lecture mode, immediately initiated an info dump. Suppressor toads are raised underground by goblins in England and dwarves in Scandinavia for the magical neurotoxin produced by their skin. It is a key component in any number of potions used to neutralize magical elements or to stop the advance of curses in wounds. But the base neurotoxin reduces magical conductivity in the witch or wizard handling them, in some cases reducing them to virtual squibs. He really shouldn't be handling one without dragonhide gloves, and even then only trained magultsologists, master potioners, or certified master healers should be handling them at all. Not children. Hermione concluded her lecture with a smug smile that made Harry grin. She was at least as oblivious as Hagrid to personal consequences, but in her it was actually funny. The swearing aura was busy producing a magical bubble from his wand, surrounding the toxic toad Trevor, while Augusta scourgified Neville's hands with teary-eyed intensity. Neville was heartbroken as his toad was taken away. He looked at the toad being removed by the two auras and began to cry. I wanted a pet, but Gran wouldn't allow it. Said with my accidents I would just get it killed, but Uncle Algie got me Trevor, and he was the first pet I ever had. Algie told me if I care for it every day, handled it all the time, and proved I could bond with it, then he would get me an owl. Now I lost Trevor too. Lady Longbottom was engaged in an intense argument with one of the auras under a privacy charm, and seemed to be missing Neville's distress. Harry was at a loss what to do, knowing that if someone tried to take Noodle just because he was slowly poisoning him into squibhood, he still wouldn't want to let go. Noodle was Noodle. Hagrid finally arrived with a large cage in hand. A huge snowy owl of fierce and intelligent demeanor scowled back from the cage. Here you go, Harry. Got you a bit of a gift. This here is a post owl. Dead useful critters, your postal owl. This here is from Dumbledore himself. A bit of a welcome to the wizarding world. Hagrid boomed, and Harry was instantly torn. Dumbledore was not an ally. He had delivered him, curse and all, to Muggle relatives who, if the Gringotts' investigatory services were to be trusted, hated magical beings with the sort of depth that used to end in witch burnings. He could not accept a gift from an enemy and enter into debt. Magically, debts were strings a powerful wizard or witch could use to manipulate or bind you. Dumbledore was in the top two for powerful and the unquestioned top in manipulative in the wizarding world. He could not accept it. He could not reject it. Harry remembered the sayings of Sharptooth the Wise. He who has one problem must solve it. He who has two problems, if he is wise, will trick them into solving each other, then clean up whatever is left. Taking the cage in one hand, he strode to Neville Longbottom and using his public proclamation voice began to speak. He noticed Madame Longbottom banishing her silencing charm to hear, and put his full force into projection so that everyone on the platform could hear. Ere Longbottom, though our actions were undertaken with the hope of protecting your health and power, Hermione Granger and I, Harry Potter, Heir Potter, have cost you the companionship and use of a devoted companion and magical ally. This cannot be allowed to stand. Please allow me to offer this magical post owl, selected by Albus Dumbledore himself, as a gift to balance the offence and wrong offered by myself and Miss Granger to Heir Longbottom and the House of Longbottom. Neville gripped the cage not by the top handle, but by the bars. This left a small boy and large owl staring unblinking into each other's eyes at a range of about 2 inches. The stare went on some time, before the owl decided that they might indeed get on, and butted nose to beak with the boy before finally blinking. Harry noted that while young Longbottom looked soft, that cage was ruddy heavy, and the boy seemed to not notice its weight at all. Definitely more there than his old Gran noticed. "Can I keep him, Gran?" Neville asked, his eyes no longer crying, but the signs of his tears still visible on his face. The elder Longbottom gripped Neville's shoulder and replied to Harry stiffly, "House Longbottom accepts your gift and deems itself well satisfied with this weregild. House Longbottom is pleased to see that House Potter continues to breed heirs of honor and strength, as caused our houses to ally in ancient times." Augusta offered, nodding regally to the gathered children before stalking off with one aura in tow. Hermione, while socially challenged, was not actually stupid, read the tension on the platform and took the temporary distraction as the opportunity it was, and grabbed both boys firmly. "This is getting political, and I am only 300 pages into the politics of wizarding Britain, and that is about 1,500 pages from well-grounded and at least 2,500 from totally caught up. We should get on the train before something socially awkward happens." Harry and Neville shared a grin as the young witch pried her wand from a venomous magical reptile and proceeded to head, but the dangerous snake in what Neville greatly feared was true unconcern. Hermione was not a normal witch. Somehow, her presence made Harry being a goblin almost reasonable if only in comparison. As Neville, Harry, and the newly named Hedwig the owl made their acquaintance, Hermione teased a small cage from her trunk containing a live white mouse. "Harry, I researched rock vipers, and did you know the black coloring indicated a dietary imbalance? A properly fed rock viper's scales will have a slight purple sheen. I brewed a mineral supplement potion and have been feeding it to this mouse for a week. Please see that he eats it," Hermione said, releasing said mouse into the compartment. Seeing owl and rock viper, the mouse immediately bolted and ran for its life. Noodle slithered from Harry's sleeve and began to chase the running mouse around the compartment and eventually under the seats. When Harry drew his wand to stun the snake, Hermione slapped it down, stating firmly, "You baby Noodle too much. He doesn't just need mineral supplements, he needs practice in hunting live prey. Rats give him a lot of meal for not a lot of work. Mice require even more work, no risk at all, and are more tasty than really filling. Think of it like a workout and vitamin pill wrapped in dessert," Hermione stated as she lifted her arms, and the mouse darted across her lap, and Noodle lunged just past her flat chest to bite it. As he wrapped it in a bowl of happy snake, all 3 children observed. Harry with humor, Hermione with satisfaction, and Neville with a blend of shock and awe. As the snake began to slowly devour the potion-fortified nutritional mouse supplement, the children began to talk. To Hermione and Harry, Neville's background was somewhat more exciting than the boy who lived. Harry considered himself a somewhat average goblin, somewhat challenged in the sword department, but having a wand was theoretically the stronger weapon, but otherwise an above-average but not outstanding goblin. Neville's stories left Hermione and Harry more than a little worried. Uncle Algy was worried I had no magic, so he kept trying to make me manifest. Once he tossed me off the pier to see if it would manifest to save me. Eventually, he dropped me out a 5-story window just as Gran was coming back from tea with Griselda Marchbanks, and instead of going splat, I bounced all the way to her and Griselda, proving I wasn't a squib. Neville said, feeding Hedwig an owl treat with quiet joy. Hermione looked concerned. That is child abuse. You could have been killed. She said, without a display of accidental magic, the whole Longbottom house was getting worried the heir had no magic at all. Uncle Algy just wanted to help. Neville said, he was the one who gave you a suppressor toad and told you to handle it every day. Unless you have more magic than a cauldron full of dragon's blood, you should have been a squib by now. Hermione raged. Where is Uncle Algy in the line of succession? I mean, if you should prove to be a squib, or say fall of a duck and drown, or fall out a 5-story window head down and break your neck, who becomes the new Lord Longbottom? Harry asked. Neville froze. Hedwig hooted loudly as the owl treat had paused halfway to the bars, and Neville's hand was shaking so bad, the bird slowly and gently pried the treat from his hands rather than snapping it. Neville turned to face Harry and Hermione and whispered simply, Uncle Algy is heir after me. Neville's face was long, pale, and endlessly weary. Hermione, neither being pureblood nor possessing anything resembling goblin dignity, tackled Neville for a combat hug. Not being gifted with a wide emotional range she could express with words, she had come of huggy people and knew when hugs were indeed the language needed. Deciding to break the ice, Neville started the traditional Hogwarts train question. So, what house do you think you will sort into? Father was Gryffindor like both your parents were Harry. Neville asked softly. Both Hermione and Harry answered in stereo. Hufflepuff. Neville looked confused. Gryffindor is the house of the brave, the house of warriors. Goblins are all warriors. I thought you would be one too. Gran says I have to be as well. Hermione snorted. Hufflepuffs are about hard work and loyalty, not charging off to get killed so someone else can be lord over a little bit more land or another seat in the wizard gamut. Harry tried to put it into terms for Neville. Do you know why after 1,000 years Gorm Longbottom's skull is still in the House of 100? Goblins fight all the time, but in 1,000 years, no one else has impressed them enough to take his place. Neville, embarrassed he didn't know a story about his own house and ancestor, shook his head. Gorm Longbottom lead his longships. That is where Longbottom comes from. Long ships with many warriors. To raid England, and dared to raid a goblin village for its gold and magical artifacts. He struck before the nearby clans could rally and was back to his ships before the warriors of the other villages caught them. When they were loading the ships, Longbottom took a handful of his men to hold the shore while the other 100+ got the ship out to sea. He and his chosen men held off a whole village full of goblins so the men he lead could get away. They fought in a line, defending each other until none of them were left, and by the time they fell, the ship with all the goblin loot and all the men he had lead were out to sea and beyond goblin revenge. Those 5 men followed him out of loyalty to Gorm Longbottom. Gorm Longbottom chose to lead the forlorn hope out of loyalty to all the men he lead to that shore. The primary virtue of the warrior isn't courage, it is loyalty. As a goblin, we take no thing unearned, and we defend what is ours to the last drop of blood and magic. We value hard work and loyalty beyond all other virtues. Bravery without loyalty is hubris. Knowledge without loyalty is useless. Cunning without loyalty is evil. Hufflepuff is my only possible house. Harry said. Neville looked troubled. He turned to Hermione. And you? I am a muggle-born witch. Women in your society are second-class citizens. I am a muggle-born, every single advantage to rise in status, power, and wealth by my own abilities is given freely to those simply lucky enough to be born pureblood. The only advantage I have on my own is hard work. The only advantage I can gain is friendship. I can't become rich, well-born, or pretty simply by trying hard. I can build loyal friendships allowing us to work together, to be strong where each other is weak, and succeed together where the wizarding world would rather see us all fail as individuals. Hufflepuff is my only possible house. Plus our head of house is Madame Sprout, the best herbologist in all of wizarding Europe. House Longbottom fortunes are built on their greenhouses, You could do a whole lot worse than spending your education under her." Hermione said with the sort of matter-of-fact tone she took to pointing out this way was up, that way was down, and of course I am always right. Neville was still chewing on that when the compartment door slid open and 3 sneering first years entered. The lead was a blond boy with slicked back hair and aristocratic features. The other 2 looked like half trolls, but were dressed as wizards. "Is it true? Is it true that Harry Potter is in this compartment?" The young blonde sneered haughtily. Harry had a feeling he practiced that sneer for hours every night in front of the mirror. He sighed, already tired. The bank was filled with these overbred, oversensitive, overindulged lordlings on a daily basis. It was one of the reasons that Gringotts provided dueling pits for goblins to take sword and axe to each other twice a day just to get through a single shift dealing with these customers. Harry stood, brushing his hair back from his goblin silver-marked swallow scar. "Yes, I am Harry Potter," he said simply. The young boy strutted forward, offering his hand. "Draco Malfoy, Air Malfoy, these are my friends Crabbe and Goyle. I see you have been slumming with squibs and mudbloods until now. Not to worry, take my hand, and I will see you introduced to the right sort of people. I can help you make the sort of connections you will need in the years ahead. Wizarding Britain is ready to change. It is better to be part of the change, not crushed under it." Draco sneered. Abraxas Malfoy was cited as a strong Grindelwald supporter and apologist, having to buy his way out of treason charges with what was then a record fine to the ministry, which, due to wartime expenditures, was more desperate for cash than Anther jailed lordling. He didn't learn, and was arrested and fined again for support for the terrorist Knights of Walpurgis, who went on to become Death Eaters. His son, your father Lucius Malfoy, broke Abraxas' record with an even larger fine to get out of Azkaban with a totally unproved claim of being under the Imperious Curse when he was arrested in a Death Eater attack, bearing the Dark Mark. Hermione smiled. Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts, chapters 21-23, citations given to the trial testimony, and the demand of prosecutors that your father receive the Dementor's kiss rather than simply a fine. Hermione concluded. Draco actually spit in rage, he was so furious. "You dirty mudblood whore! Crabbe, Goyle, kick those overgrown teeth in, then throw her dirty blood body off the train." He screamed. Neville and Harry almost hit each other as they rose from opposite sides, wands in hand, and blood in their eyes. Crabbe and Goyle were larger than either boy, but neither Longbottom or Potter seemed interested in doing the math. Hermione and Draco reached for their own wands, but from beneath Hermione's hair came the fight's short and brutal ending. Noodle struck. Lunging from beneath Hermione's hair, he wrapped himself around Malfoy's neck and let his venom-dripping fangs dimple but not pierce the young Malfoy's cheek, causing Malfoy to scream like a child and fall trembling to the ground. "You will not harm Mousegiver. You will not shout at Mousegiver. Will not point a wand at Mousegiver, nor allow any of your slaves to do so, or I will bite you. And the venom of my mother's line has never been resisted by any goblin, wizard, elf, or troll. You will die screaming, and I will watch. Tell him, speaker." Noodle hissed. Harry translated, and everyone in the compartment went still. A prefect in Slytherin colors appeared in the doorway, but chose wisely not to act. The Malfoy heir saw the prefect and begged, "Pusey, the mudblood set her snake on me. Make it stop." Adrian Pusey observed with the casual unconcern that Slytherin prided itself on, but the sharp eye of the returning captain of the champion Quidditch team. "I rather think the gentleman speaking Parseltongue is the snake's master. I have a feeling if I so much as raise a wand or attempt wandless magic, House Malfoy will need a new heir. Is that correct?" Prefect Adrian Pusey asked genially. Noodle listened to Harry's hissed translation and rose up to observe the prefect more closely. "This one isn't stupid. Ask it if it can muzzle and cage the one who threatened Mousegiver, or should I just kill it before it breeds further embarrassments to its line?" Noodle hissed, while Harry translated. Keeping his eyes on the snake, Pusey bowed slowly and responded firmly. "Right then, assure your snake I will take all 3 of these idiots to the Slytherin prefect compartment and make sure they do not move, speak, or breed until I can turn them over to the staff at Hogwarts." Pusey smirked, utterly unconcerned at Malfoy's tear-filled eyes. Pusey bowed to Harry's speaker. Again to Hermione, Mousegiver, lastly to Neville. Ere Longbottom received the greetings of Ere Secondus Pusey, love to chat but have to take out the garbage. Come along, Malfoy and mouth breathers, Pusey said, jauntily dragging Malfoy and kicking Crabbe and Goyle out the door. Hermione looked confused. Was he being polite? Harry, we are going to be in a lot of trouble for this, I just know it. Neville chose to answer both with a shrug. Of course he was being polite. We were threatening to murder someone and doing social networking at the same time. It is practically a Slytherin orgy. We are definitely in trouble, but Hermione got her own name in Parsleytongue. Hermione straightened up and smiled. Mouse giver. Noodle is such a thoughtful and intelligent snake. Harry, why couldn't you be more like Noodle? Hermione said as she stroked the serpent's crown, and he snuggled onto her lap for warmth and adoration while he digested his nutrient-enhanced mouse. This is why snakes only get sorted into Slytherin. No loyalty at all. Leave me for the first pretty face with a drugged mouse. I swear I am getting a badger. Harry griped as the train steamed towards Hogwarts and an eventful year. 4. Chapter 4. Sorting and Fallout. First year's with me. First year's come along. Smartly now. Hagrid boomed happily. If something that sounded like a fond foghorn could be called happy rather than simply intimidating. He gathered the bewildered first years by sheer force of personality and decibel, and herded them like robed and bewildered ducklings towards the dark, while the laughing senior years got into carriages pulled by the most alarming lizard skeleton Pegasus creatures. Hagrid, what are those things? Harry pointed with alarm at the nightmares pulling the carriages. What things? Asked Hermione. You mean the self-driving carriages? Hogwarts had them long before Muggles did, Neville said smugly. Hagrid stopped and looked alarmed at Harry and responded in a much more serious tone. You can see them then, lad. I know about that night, of course, but with you being so young and all, I mean we all assumed you would not remember. Hagrid looked troubled. They aren't self-driving carriages, Mr. Longbottom. They are pulled by the Thestrals. Much misunderstood creatures, your Thistral. Very protective of their young, gentle with each other, but they get a bad reputation among light wizards on account of only those who have seen and accepted death of their own kind can see them. Hagrid concluded. Placing a hand very firmly behind Harry, he pushed him towards the boats. All right, first years, and you get 4 to a boat, no shoving. The only way to truly see Hogwarts the first time is from the Black Lake under moonlight. Hagrid boomed, pushing the first years towards the boats. Hagrid, nothing is pushing the boats. There are no runes, no motors, no tow ropes, and I don't think goblins can even swim. None of us can steer the boats, and none of us even knows the way. Hermione said with the firm voice her mother used in explaining why a proposed course of action was the way to inevitable doom and must be abandoned immediately. Are you sure it's safe? She said, throwing the well-meaning giant adult a way of backing away from a poor life choice endangering children before she was forced to question authority, openly, something both her mother and father taught her to avoid wherever possible. Hagrid laughed with the sort of booming belonging to artillery or falling buildings, and slapped his sides before waving madly at the deep water. A long orange darted tentacle wider at its widest than her outstretched arm, and tall as a pine tree, rose from the water and waved back. We aren't trusting students to drive, or even to stay in the boat. I mean, Hogwarts has been dealing with first years since before Muggles learned to make gunpowder, and we haven't drowned one yet. This here be the giant squid. Helga Hufflepuff herself raised it when they were building Hogwarts, and they have been guiding first years across the lake ever since. Hagrid boomed happily at the waving tentacle. Some students, younger siblings or those who actually listened to their parents' stories, snickered. Others who were not as clued in, the normal Muggle-borns, and those who had tentacle-related issues screamed, and Hermione Granger, her safety concerns addressed in what she thought was a full and complete manner, began stomping forward firmly. Right then, 3 to a boat. Best even the weight so left and right in pairs, and best keep the sizes about even to keep it from tipping. Hermione stated firmly, remembering her lessons in boating from the Royal Life Saving Society summer camp. With Harry being broader and heavier than Hermione and following her to the bow, Neville scooted behind Hermione and felt the boat lurch slightly. A rather big-boned girl with a permanent scowl came to the side of the boat and, blushing in deep embarrassment, asked if she could join them. Be possible to join you. I am Millicent Bulstrode. I was travelling with Miss Greengrass, but she has so kindly informed me that my cow-like half-blooded body would likely tip the boat of delicate, pure-blooded girls. Millicent said, with the sort of contained anger that showed what being raised half-blood in a pure-blooded house could offer. "Please do," said Neville, where he gripped the transom firmly, trying to stabilize the boat. "Me gran says long-bottom boys were made to swing axes, not wands. If we don't get a fourth with some actual substance, I think we're all going to meet the tentacles a few times on our way over." As Millicent stepped carefully into the boat, Hermione proved her mastery of the theory of female social interaction while simultaneously ruining the practice of it. "Ignore them, Miss Bulstrode. My mother says that young girls target bigger girls in elementary school out of fear they will develop boobs and the skinny girls won't. It's all body-shaming nonsense, anyway. We are learning to become the kind of witches boys will be terrified to even glance at, not vapid over bred maidens who will swoon in the face of danger, while some limp-wristed wizard will struggle to raise a wand in our defense," Hermione said firmly. Millicent choked. Harry laughed and Neville finally burst forth. "Blimey, Hermione, you can't just say things like that. Gran would have my hide off in strips for even mentioning boobs and wands in the same sentence. It's not decent." Neville said in embarrassed horror. "Not wrong either." Millicent muttered so quietly no one beyond the boat heard her. Harry forgot boobs and wands, pure-blood culture and wizard etiquette altogether as they slipped from the shore and trees, and for the first time in his life, he saw the stars. The sky was a cavern made of the whole universe. The moon blazed like goblin silver in the sky, its great craters and mountains, stone seas and scars comforting the way the native rock of the caverns below Gringotts could only be to a goblin, but beyond its light blazed thousands of tiny candles. Stars. Stars and planets, perhaps even comets. No living goblin child had seen these in centuries since the Wars of Shame. While the Goblin rebellions had secured a place for goblins in wizarding Britain, it was a place below ground, denied the sun and the stars, denied the endless cavern of the infinite. Harry wept. Hermione looked over in terror. Harry was crying and she was panicking. She was a very sensible girl, one who pried rationality as her tool for understanding the universe, and she did not understand what had Harry looking up at the sky and shaking. "Harry," she asked softly, "what's wrong?" "The sky, Hermione, the stars." He turned to her and broke at last. "My mother and sister will never see them. My brother will only see them if some high-born lord lowers himself to call him to attend him above ground some evening. They took the stars from us, Hermione. They stole the sky, and I am the only one who gets to see it." Harry was weeping at the loss of his race, his nation, and his family. A goblin to the soul, the irony that he was himself a lord who could make that call was the farthest thing from his mind. He was a goblin child beneath the stars his people would be forever denied, and he cried. Hermione had no answer, save to hug him tightly as her parents did when she cried, and could not make them understand why. When you had no answers, you hugged. It was what her family did. Neville and Millicent looked on in the horror that those raise among the pure-blooded elite, especially if a half-blood that had to ape the standards she would always be judged by, could feel to openly expressed weakness, emotion, and affection. The long-tormented presumed squib boy and the half-tolerated half-blood saw the raw wound in Harry and mutely vowed to pretend they hadn't. Their own wounds and lack of support bound them in an unspoken, but no less potent vow of silence. They had recovered from the unexpected emotional display when the calls from the other boats drew their attention from the vault of the heavens down to a more earth-bound display of lights. Hogwarts loomed by the shore of the Black Lake, but Hermione felt her sensibilities break at its sight. Mad King Ludwig of Bavaria made a castle that became the model for Disney's famous fairy tale castle that all Muggle boys and girls judged fantasy castles by, but it was a pale, timid thing beside Hogwarts. It rose like a mountain of stone and lights. Gothic and brutal, it loomed like a mountain of man-made stone. Towers thrust proudly to the sky, as if defying the howling winds of the Scottish Highlands to do their worst, for it cared not. The walls were studded with battlements and looming gargoyles that implied firmly that should they choose to wake up and fly, they could indeed do so, and it would be best for you not to be in their path when they so chose. Windows burned with flickering torchlight. more windows than strictly speaking there ought to be, as if however large the castle seemed to be from the outside, either the floors were only 4 feet high, or there was, in fact, rather more of the castle inside than it chose to show you outside. To Harry and Hermione, the greatest part was the burning aurora thrown up by the walls to the sky, painting the night in a wash of color and a song, for the energy rippling from the wards sang to anyone with magical senses at all. Oh my God, Hermione, those are the wards. The wards are so powerful they light up the sky, so powerful they make the very air sing. I never dreamed there could be any wards in all the world half as strong as Gringotts, but this is. Harry trailed off. Magical, Hermione gushed. Wards so powerful, we can't make muggles notice the castle if we wanted to. Can't even get non-magical animals inside. The wards notice me not is so strong the elves have to butcher the meat animals beyond the wards, because you can't even get a non-magical animal inside the place unless it's still in the egg. It's why the budget for Hogwarts allows for a gamekeeper who lives outside the walls. Otherwise, we would all be trying to stay alive in a Scottish winter on nothing but oatmeal and stewed vegetables. Millicent shuddered at the thought of going vegetarian in the driving sleet of Scotland. They passed beneath the ivy arches to the docks, where Hagrid counted slowly on his fingers, comparing his answer to his parchment, to make sure he had again the same number of first-year ducklings he left with, then led them to the heavy wooden doors. Boom, boom, boom. His heavy fist struck the door like a medieval battering ram. A stern-looking witch in long dark green velvet dress, with a matching broad witch's hat, with a scarlet band, clasped with a golden lion buckle, eyed him with the hauteur of a queen. The first years, Professor McGonagall, Hagrid gushed happily. Thank you, Hagrid. The regal woman, Professor McGonagall presumably said, ushering the children inside. They were led down a long hallway towards the growing sounds of children reunited after an excited summer and all trying to talk at once. Now, if you will all form a line by last name, you will be called one by one for your sorting. You will be each sorted into one of the houses of Hogwarts, which will be like a second family for all of your years at Hogwarts. Each of the houses represent one of the founding four, the greatest witches and wizards in the history of wizarding Britain, and each of these houses can guide you using the tools and gifts that come easiest to you to become the witch or wizard you were meant to be. You will live as a house, take classes as a house, and you will receive, and in time provide, mentorship to and from other members of your house. While the houses exist to teach you individual excellence, they rise and fall together, as the individual successes and failures of each member contribute to the house points and eventual house cup that only the best house at Hogwarts receives each year. For first years, the cup is mostly about honor and glory, but from third year onward, it will bring tangible privilege and access to limited resources and knowledge that provide a significant advantage to those with the wit and will to use them. McGonagall continued, managing to weave a little of the classic motivation of all of the houses into her spiel. The four houses are Gryffindor, the House of Lions, where the brave and bold carve a path to greatness through daring and will. Ravenclaw, the House of Eagles, where knowledge is hoarded like gold and wielded like weapons upon the path to glory. Slytherin, the House of Serpents, where cunning and ambition guide the path unseen for those who dare to follow to its greatness. Hufflepuff, the House of Badgers, where those who find no glory won without comrades worth having, and who value no thing unearned, will follow the hardest road of all to a victory whose price they learned full well. Professor McGonagall described the houses with a bit more poetry than the books did, but in his goblin soul, Harry felt the challenge of the House of Badgers rise within him, thundering in his blood like a call to battle. Noodle slipped from his sleeve and hissed at him. "You are being stupid and goblin-y again, aren't you?" Noodle hissed. Harry grinned. "No thing unearned. I am for House Hufflepuff." Harry hissed in parley tongue, causing most of the nearby students to move away suddenly. In House Slytherin, I would have grown fat by the fire, every terrified pureblood laying stunned rats before my like offerings to an uncaring and abusive god. You would have been Prince of Slytherin just because I find you mildly tolerable as perch and a better conversationalist than my idiot siblings. Noodle hissed. You would have gotten fat and lazy, and some post-owl would have eaten you as a treat when you lost your hunter's edge. Your mother would die of shame that a serpent of her clutch was prey to a wizard's messenger bird by accident. Harry replied with a smirk. Noodle hissed in laughter. Dollar if Mousebringer learns to speak, I am leaving you. Noodle concluded without any shame, then Head buted his dim goblin ward and returned to his nap. The great hall was vast, so vast that indeed Harry was aware of the fact that rooms inside Hogwarts did not match the external dimensions, even as they appeared to retain absolute internal relative relations. He suspected the arithromancy required for such a feat would be forever beyond him. So distracted was he by the magical mathematic implications that he almost missed when a large floopy and utterly disreputable head sitting on a stool in the middle of the great hall suddenly turned and scowled at the first years. Harry froze. When magical object without a visible brain begin thinking and acting on their own without any external direction, smart goblins stand behind someone as much stronger and more disposable as they can find. Harry yanked Hermione and Neville directly behind Professor McGonagall as the hat began to sing. The song was utterly horrid, and the voice had harmonics that Harry was terrified to notice were in his mind, not his ears, but it was filled with the sort of humor his father Griphook and Arms Masters had when playing with the children. The casual humor of the truly powerful when amusing themselves with beings so far removed from being able to defend themselves that the hat or goblin in question had to err on the side of softness, so as to not accidentally obliterate the delicate younglings they played with. Hannah Abbott, McGonagall said firmly, and a blonde girl with pigtails wandered to the stool and sat the hat upon her head. Her eyes and ears disappeared under a hat far too large, but the hat's mouth and the girl's both turned up in mischievous grins as they chatted about something before it shouted loudly, Hufflepuff. The next girl was rather more businesslike, but Susan Bones followed Hannah Abbott to the Hufflepuff table before Millicent Bulstrode took her place beneath the hat. The hat nodded comically on her head as her arms waved about, as one does when they cannot speak without their hands, and whatever she was saying the hat seemed to agree wholeheartedly. Whatever silencing charm it used vanished as it opened its slit mouth wide and shouted. Never really a question was there. Slytherin, the hat shouted, and the large square girl strode to the Slytherin table like a gladiatrix to her next battle. Harry couldn't really bring himself to care about the other sortings, although he caught the frown on Millicent's face when Draco stalked past her to claim primacy among the first years at the far end of their table. Hermione also noted Millicent's snubbing and frowned thoughtfully. Neville noticed and tugged her arm. Listen, Hermione. I know you want to help, but pure-blood manners are a thing in our culture, and while some like Gryffindor make a show of ignoring them in public, even their purebloods only really excuse ignoring it among those they consider friends. You can't break their society rules without painting a target on her. Neville begged her. Hermione, of course, took what she wanted from that and proceeded to be Hermione anyway. Right, rules, she said firmly as her name was called. Hermione Granger. McGonagall said primly, and Hermione marched towards the hat like a SGT major about to inspect a load of new recruits in need of a proper terrorizing. Morgana's tits, she's going to do something, swore Neville. Harry just grinned. Hermione wasn't oblivious to social norms, she just didn't feel they in any way described the limit of her logical actions. She was his friend, and if she was going to make a play, he would back it. Hufflepuff, shouted the sorting hat with obvious relish, and a loud chuckle. Hermione did not, in fact, move to the Hufflepuff table already beginning to cheer, but to the Slytherin table. Draco, preparing for a scene, had his sneer in place, and a racial slur already queued up to release when she stopped before one of the badged Slytherin prefects. Ere secundus Pusey, I thank you for your earlier courtesy and beg leave to correct my earlier oversight and complete our introduction. Hermione said loud enough to cut through the rising chatter. Hermione Granger of Newhouse Granger, honored to make your acquaintance. Hermione said and dipped into the full curtsy of a lesser house, acknowledging a greater for the first time. Pusey rose languidly. Well met, Mousebringer. House Pusey welcomes your acquaintance and wishes the House of Granger to grow in the shadow of your grace and power. The prefect's smile made his friendliness clear, even as his formal bow made his recognition of her a matter of record. To scorn who he had thus accepted would be an implied discourtesy to his own house and position as prefect. Hermione turned and curtsied again, this time not as deeply. "An honor to see you again, Miss Bulstrode," Hermione said, meeting the eyes of her former boat-mate. Millicent rose, as if being the only first year, neither heiress nor of a particularly high house, singled out for acknowledgment, was the most natural thing in the whole world, and no less than she deserved. "The honor is mutual, Miss Granger. The House of Badgers knows not its fortune this night," Millicent offered wryly. "Nor the House of Serpents, I think," said Hermione, aware that she had begun a challenge to the assumed primacy within the Slytherin first years. Hermione's passage past the instructors' tables had both Professor Snape and Sprout following her passage, as if observing some strange new forest animal that had wandered into the hall unknowing. Snape had more horror, and Sprout more wonder, but there was a mix of each in both. When he heard his name called, Neville had actually not noticed that his earlier indecision between the Gryffindor he had been programmed from birth to follow his maimed and martyred father into, or the Hufflepuff his heart had been spending a train and boat ride beginning to yearn for, was over. No, Neville somehow internally declared for Hufflepuff as he marched towards the Sorting Hat like a warrior to the battle line. The questions in his brain were, do I try to limit the damage she has done by challenging the House of Malfoy and the purebloods of Slytherin in general for her own good? Or do I pull something Gryffindor and double down? This is why Neville never thought he would make a good Gryffindor. The move seemed stupid. He placed the hat on his head almost without noticing. Number Hermione had done what she had done to show Millicent she was not alone. If Neville tried to protect Hermione from the backlash by softening the insult, he would be showing he didn't trust her judgment, and that friendship to both Millicent and Hermione was worth less than placating the powers that ran the school and honestly their society. The smart move would be to soften the blow. Gran always said I was an idiot. Hermione was a friend. If she stood with Millicent, then Neville shouldn't have to think twice before doing the same. Gran would explode, but Neville would stand with his friends. "Well, that doesn't really leave a whole lot for me to do, does it, boy? Better be Hufflepuff," the hat shouted, and Neville just about died of shock. He had forgotten he was being sorted. The hat began laughing and was almost in tears, if something that dusty could muster tears, before he set it back on the stool. Marching firmly to the Slytherin table, he offered a regal nod to Prefect Pusey, who was deeply amused. "Pusey," Neville said. The greeting of equals his aunt would have lost more than a few heartbeats to see her stuttering, nervous air offer with iron firmness. "Longbottom," Pusey cheered, raising a glass in salute and grinning like he had front-row seats at the goal hoops of the Quidditch World Cup. Turning slightly, he marched past both Draco Malfoy and Daphne Greengrass, the only other two heirs from the Sacred 28, the only other names and lineages in the Book of Gold, to stop in front of a half-blood girl whose family was only barely in the Book of Silver, and bow to the millimeter, the exact degree one offered in public, to acknowledge a friend of your house to those you wish to mark such a relationship. "Miss Bulstrode, your company on the boat ride over was most agreeable. Convey my respects to your Lord Father and Lady Mother," Neville offered with a formality that had Draco seething, because to offer such honors to a lesser house, while ignoring two greater houses seated right beside them at a first formal and very much public introduction, was a statement that would make the gossip columns the way such a gesture from a mudblood never could. Millicent rose again, blushing lightly, as her heart rate matched Neville's in the awareness that her entire career in Hogwarts and Slytherin would be a battle, but at least she would not be entirely alone. "Mr. Longbottom, you are as well-mannered as you are bold. Please convey my deepest respect to Dowager Longbottom for raising such an heir," Millicent said, loudly enough to cut through the rising whispers that made the Slytherin table resemble the snake pit it was so often called. Neville didn't notice the looks he got from the staff table, but the cheers he got from the Hufflepuff table made it clear that the House of Badgers had a very real appreciation for the size of the bludgers beneath your broom to make an open challenge to the whole House of Slytherin on your first day in first year. Harry simply grinned. It was almost goblin. The kind of loyalty that didn't simply inspire moments of suicidal courage, but endless days of effort and nights of struggle to be worthy of the loyalty you were offered in turn. This is not Gryffindor courage or Slytherin cunning. It may indeed be such obvious foolishness as to ban you utterly from Ravenclaw's House of the Wise, but it was the heart and soul of Hufflepuff. No thing unearned. Loyalty was a debt, and debts didn't get paid by anything less than every bit of effort you had in you, and if that wasn't enough, then you simply became more until it was enough. Harry Potter. Professor McGonagall said with a note of worry as she looked at the madly grinning boy beside her. That is not how you approached your sorting. Harry charged the hat like a king stag upon a pretender to his herd. Taking the hat in hand, he slammed it onto his head like he was crowning himself king and ready to get on with defending the title. You could at least pretend there are other houses you know. Why am I even here? Fine, let's get this charade over with. I just hope you don't get blood all over the dessert trays before the feast is even over. The hat said that, apparently without bothering to use the silencing charms it was required to use on its private sorting discussions, based on the shocked and horrified looks on the staff table as the hat shouted, Hufflepuff, placing the hat carefully down and patting it on the head twice as if to console it. Harry turned with a smile towards the now expectant Slytherin table. Pusey was grinning widely as Harry Potter strode to the table. Ere secundus Pusey, I must offer my heartfelt apologies for my earlier discourtesies in not formally introducing myself when you came to settle that regrettable incident. I am Harry Potter, heir presumptive to the most ancient and noble house of Potter, Harry said as he bowed deeply, more than their order of precedence required, but allowable in the particular case of apology. Pusey stood and bowed respectfully. Good to put a name to the speaker, Heir Potter. Think nothing of the irregularities of our earlier meetings. As prefects, one expects a bit of disorder, and expediency rather than formality seemed best under the circumstances. Pusey offered casually. Noodle recognized the voice and slitted up Harry's collar and out the neck, rising almost 2 feet to taste the air and have a look. Look, it's the sensible one. Make more friends like these. I can't eat all the idiots in this place. I am not a basilisk. Noodle hissed. The Slytherin table froze, some in shock, Malfoy in fear, and half the professors had shot upright at their own table. The hall was busy exploding in reaction, but Noodle, Harry, and Pusey carried on as if this was standard light dinner conversation. Harry sighed and translated for Pusey, who took it as no more than deserved. He tossed a bit of raw chicken that he had had one of the house elves procure for him as the feast began, against the possibility of needing to bribe a rather large and extremely deadly magical snake. Good to see you again, Noodle. There are indeed too many idiots to eat them all, but if this crop of firsties fails to shape up, I just might find it in my heart to carve a bit off one now, and then for certain discerning and deserving serpents. Pusey offered as the snake lashed out faster than any human reflexes to gobble down the tossed meat. Harry's hissed translation for Noodle resulted in Pusey and Noodle sharing a very grave nod. As Harry turned toward the first-year end of the table, Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle fled to huddle at the back of the hall, while Daphne Greengrass went pale with the determination that she would die in place rather than shame House Greengrass by flight. Millicent simply sighed, knowing what was going to happen next. Miss Bulstrode, I thank you for joining us for the boat ride this evening. Without your company and thoughts, it would have been a much less delightful voyage. Harry said with a bow. Millicent stood and bowed again. Heir Potter, your company and words both honored me then and now. Her attempt at formality ended when Noodle slid out and tasted her skin to take her scent. She giggled, which was not a sound that the rather physically intimidating girl seemed suited for. But when she began to stroke the snake and coo at it, as it closed its eyes and swayed softly at her caress, it brought a gentleness to her features that made her seem shockingly pretty. The senior years were looking at her stroking Heir Potter's magical snake familiar with a sort of frown that said they were busy redoing the math that settled social precedents again in their head, and beginning to think their earlier sums may have been wrong. Harry slid between Hermione and Neville at the Hufflepuff table and began a much less formal round of Intrictians as his housemates visibly puffed up with pride. The snide sneers of the supposed House of Cast-Offs were going to be harder to make this year. The Hufflepuff first years were off to a legendary start. As the feast progressed, Draco Malfoy was seen approaching Professor Snape, and after several minutes of what was clearly Draco's best performances, Professor Snape marched to Professor Dumbledore, where he held court in the center of the table like some beneficent guard before his lowly worshippers. After a few muttered phrases, a very stout witch rose from her end of the table and charged the quiet conversation like a small, maternal, but nonetheless enraged badger, and turned the discussion into what must be a rather loud three-way argument judging by Dumbledore's winces, but due to silencing charms, you couldn't really tell. Oddly, as Harry observed this over a rather large meal of unfamiliar dishes, between Neville and Hermione, they were able to introduce the goblin-raised boy to what passed for English and Scottish cuisine. It was Professor Quirrell in his purple turban, whose eyes seemed to be boring into Harry with the focus and intent of goblin drill bits. Cedric Diggory, the social center of the third years of Hufflepuff, and their star Quidditch seeker noticed and leaned over. "Look, Harry, do you know Professor Quirrell already? He's looking at you like Filch would if you shaved his cat. I know why Snape is about to pop a blood vessel, but Quirrell was Ravenclaw, isn't related to any of the pure-blooded idiots you have started a feud with, and usually can't stutter his way through a sentence far enough to even think about insulting someone. But he seems to be right pissed at you." The third year asked softly, looking to see if there was anything he needed to warn Professor Sprout about ahead of time. Harry looked back at him. "I was told there was a professor here that hated goblins, but that was supposed to be Binns," Harry said, trying to remember his preschool briefing. Cedric nodded. "Yeah, he hates goblins so much he died about 40 years ago and got up and went to work the next day to tell us all about goblin rebellions and atrocities. My dad's about as anti-creature as you can get, nothing personal, Harry, and even he thinks Binns is a racist prat. Dad says Dumbledore only keeps him on because he's a ghost and works for free. Salary just disappears into Dumbledore knows, where until he hires a new living professor to receive it." Cedric offered. Harry shrugged. He was used to it. Goblins were hated by everyone who wasn't a goblin. As a goblin who was also human, he was even hated by most other goblins. Harry was used to being hated. Maybe Quirrell simply hated snakes. All kinds of bigots in the wizard world, but this treacle-tart thing that was worth putting up with a few racist prats for. Harry dug in with his spoon and forgot about angry teachers. Professor Sprout stood as the students were led by their prefects to the dungeon common room and quietly pulled aside Harry, Hermione, and Neville. With a smile, she gave them all a welcoming nod. "Good evening, students. I am Professor Sprout, your head of house. Let me start by saying that I have been quite pleased both with your sorting and with the degree of courtesy and loyalty you have demonstrated before the whole school tonight." She sighed and deflated a little bit. "That being said, Professor Snape has brought to our attention what he claims is a very serious case of attempted murder that he feels compelled to bring before Professor Dumbledore for judgment. As your head of house, I will of course be there to defend and advise you, as you cannot be expected to know your own rights, let alone see that they are respected." Hermione looked terrified. Neville looked resigned, as if this sort of thing happened to him every day, and while he wished it didn't, he didn't really expect it to stop. Harry felt the thrill of battle, and the very goblin awareness of every clause and codicil that unwary wizards would offer a cunning and ruthless goblin in any sort of administrative combat. Don't fight a dragon in the sky or a banker over penalty clauses. That was one of the first things his father taught him. Time Hogwarts learned it too. The gateway to Dumbledore's private office was guarded by a gargoyle that was carved in stone, but somehow capable of turning to glare at them anyway. Harry was beginning to suspect that so much magic had soaked into Hogwarts that its toilets might have developed enough sentience to contemplate suicide at the combination of student digestive tracts and Hogwarts feasts. That was about as far along that line of thought as he wanted to go. Professor Sprout, for all that she looked like the very picture of plump maternal softness, took the stairs like she had places to be, and that the stairs had best get out of her way. Harry matched her pace with a grin, but Neville and Hermione were without breath when they got to the office, which probably kept them from reacting to the sneering Draco and Snape combination, like a little blonde budgie trying to imitate the looming bat behind him. A rather smugly smiling Professor Dumbledore showed the grace and cheer of a person who had spent the last hour looking for his glasses only to sneeze and have them fall out of his hair and back into place. Clearly his terror at misplacing the boy who lived and losing his chokehold of control, as the boy's only possible source of aid, was relaxed in the face of Harry's assumed predicament. Professor McGonagall was presumably present in her deputy headmistress position, and Professor Flitwick's presence was either due to all three other heads of house being there, or because he was half goblin and someone had the sense Athena gave post-owls to bring a goblin expert into a clash of cultures involving a legal goblin citizen. Ah, thank you, Professor Sprout. Now, Harry, I think before we begin, you will have to allow me to stun and contain your snake. Rock vipers are a Class X magical creature, controlled by the Ministry, and not at all on the approved list of pets for Hogwarts students. Dumbledore said, with the voice of an elder offering guidance to a particularly stupid youth that would likely never survive party training without at least a full-time house elf supervising. Harry smiled in a wide smile that had Professor Flitwick flinching, as it was the warning to enemies smile that goblins offered not as a threat, but to announce the war was already on. Best see about resisting a bit before dying. My father advised that you were indeed a most ancient elder, and might be forgiven what would otherwise be a deadly insult from a wizard of greater youth and vitality. Harry offered in a very slightly veiled insinuation that Dumbledore was senile, and then proceeded to pull out a parchment which he offered to Professor Sprout, not to Dumbledore's outstretched hand. As this was submitted to both headmaster and deputy headmistress for the regulations for students with sensory support animals, I retained a certified true copy for my head of house once sorted. As clearly indicated by my clan healer, and signed off by Hogwarts' own Madame Pomfrey as Hogwarts healer, my snake is my bonded familiar, required to deal with my visual handicap, and thus no more reasonable to ask me to remove than to strip Aura Moody of his artificial eye and leg. Harry said, referencing the famous Mad Eye Moody, who was the single most effective Aura in the last war, and the only living member of Dumbledore's Order of the Phoenix that goblins were worried about. Dumbledore frowned, glaring at Harry's face, noting the lack of glasses with deep suspicion, even as Professor Snape snapped out sarcastically. What handicap, Potter? The inability to murder other students with magic like a real wizard. Not wizard enough for a spell, or goblin enough for a sword either. Snape smirked, looking down a long and hooked nose at him. Flitwick burst before Sprout could do more than open her mouth to object. Mind your tongue, Severus. Harry Potter is a goblin, second in line for the lordship of his clan, and in every legal sense as much, if not more, a goblin than I am. That being said, he is not a goblin born, and in any tunnel or room where there is no magical light, or where light may be taken away by his enemies or superiors in magic, he is more blind than any goblin infant. His snake is a rock viper. Its senses do not rely on visible light at all to see, and as long as they are paired, he is effectively sighted. To attempt to separate him from his bonded snake would be the same as taking away glasses from a student with a prescription. Flitwick said, and his hand hovered over his wand in a way that made Snape grow very still. Flitwick had been European dueling champion for decades, and he retired still holding the title. He is not a goblin. Snape insisted. According to Hogwarts, he is. Professor Sprout insisted, pulling out her own sheaf of student medical parchments that were delivered to her by Madame Pomfrey after the sorting. Waving the parchment in front of Dumbledore, Professor Sprout looked more like an angry badger than she had any right to physically, as she turned and braced the acknowledged champion of the light and defeater of the Dark Lord Grindelwald. Not only is he accepted by Hogwarts as a goblin, and Noodle as his visual support familiar, but as I had a copy of this parchment since his sorting you have had it from his acceptance. Your ignoring this to cripple the boy is not simply illegal, it is shameful. Professor Sprout said, pushing her face far enough across the desk to force the headmaster to lean back to avoid her. Dumbledore reset and tried another argument. A rock viper is a Class X magical creature, and a proximal threat to other students. Had this been some other sort of animal, I might be persuaded to allow some sort of compromise. But how could I face the parents of other Hogwarts students if I allowed such a monster within our halls? Dumbledore smiled as if he had just won re-election in the Wizengamot, not noticing the angry stare Snape now directed at him. Harry's blood was up, and he responded with fury rather than forethought. Some other animal. Some other animal. This is Hogwarts. These walls were raised by Salazar Slytherin himself. The wards are woven with parcel magic as much as the runes of Ravenclaw and the charms of Hufflepuff, and you dare say serpents are not welcome. Harry raged, and Noodle slid out of his collar looking for proximal threats, hissing and tasting the air. You dare tell a parsley-tongue that he must surrender his bonded serpent because he is not welcome within the walls raised by Slytherin himself. A parcel-tongue and his serpent are one being. This was written into the founding law. Harry hissed in parcel-tongue, causing the serpents in the portrait frames of the Slytherin portraits to rise from their frames and hiss at Dumbledore angrily. Harry realized his mistake and translated into English. You dare tell a parsley-tongue that he must surrender his bonded serpent because he is not welcome within the walls raised by Slytherin himself. A parcel-tongue and his serpent are one being. This was written into the founding law. Harry repeated, this time slowly and firmly as if repeating the exact terms of a penalty clause to a contract defaulter. You cannot expect me to be bound by some bit of historic trivia. I am headmaster. I decide what is allowable and safe here, not some third year with what everyone in Wizarding Britain knows is a suspect and most likely dark gift. Dumbledore said, his control slipping and his hand slamming down on his desk, causing every child in the room except Harry to flinch. Dumbledore realized his kindly grandfather mask had slipped and leaned back, stroking his beard, and tried to collect his thoughts. Are the traditions of my house no longer worthy of your respect than Albus? Are the words of the founders, the laws upon which your authority is based, and from which your only legal power is derived, then no longer in force? Shall I now pick and choose which among your orders and regulations I find worth obeying? Please tell me this is so, for I find many of your regulations. Snape allowed his voice to slip an octave deeper, and his voice grow actively venomous, restricting. As Dumbledore opened his mouth to object, McGonagall settled the issue with no small amount of anger. Give it a rest, Albus. You haven't a foot to stand on. Your own familiar is a ruddy phoenix, easily capable of burning half of Hogwarts down, and all the students in it before any of us could stop it. The law is the law, and it binds you too. Now can we get on to the actual complaint? Some have actually spent the day working and would like to get to our beds sometime before dawn. McGonagall snapped angrily. Dumbledore reclaimed control of the meeting and coached Draco through a very dramatic and slanted retelling of the story. To hear Draco tell it, it was Harry's stated intention of tormenting and murdering Draco Malfoy to avenge the loss of his parents. Hermione was about to explode, and only Neville physically restraining her and whispering some political analysis into her ear was keeping her from shouting at every lie. Harry, on the other hand, was a goblin and didn't believe in letting the enemy choose the particulars of a battle he was actually in. He turned to Professor Sprout and whispered to her. With a surprised nod, she raised her wand, and a shining silver badger leapt from her wand and shot out of the office. A round of sharp glances from inquiring to accusing bounced off the stout woman's shoulders like so much parting soil during a mandrake reparting. Hermione fared very poorly under Dumbledore's visibly partisan interrogation, as she lacked any sort of natural affinity for twisting, spinning, slanting, or outright perverting the truth, so it was unrecognizable in any sense other than, unfortunately, legal. She was reduced to silent tears before the end. Neville was well trained by his grandmother, but wilted under the scorn of Dumbledore, who wielded his authority like a whip to cow the beaten boy. While Neville was able to keep Dumbledore from twisting his words, his testimony ended being given mostly in a whisper with his eyes cast down and fists clenched with rage. Harry was halfway through his own description, showing every inch of the training his goblin family drilled into them every single evening. There was a reason why goblins ruled the wizard economy. Wizards lacked the ruthlessness and attention to detail to ever get the better of a goblin of Gringotts. Lily Evans was thus held to be some sort of semi-divine figure or cautionary tale to budding account managers of that institution. Albus Dumbledore, for all his power, magical and otherwise, was not. The door to Dumbledore's office irised open, and Slytherin prefect Adrian Pusey swept in, striding to Professor Sprout and handing her 3 vials. "There you go, Professor Sprout. Happy to help." Prefect Pusey smiled, pretending only partially successfully not to notice the eyes of some of the most powerful sorcerers in the British Isles who were focused rather firmly upon him. "And what, Mr. Pusey, would that be? For that matter, may I ask why a prefect of my house is running errands for another head of house?" Snape asked with a slow, lazy drawl that showed where Pusey had learned it, and who had so influenced his education that he imitated him. "That is just the thing, sir, as you briefed us when we were tasked to look after the first years upon the train. In your words, sir, the students before sorting are under the protection of all houses. As a prefect of the noble house of Slytherin, you are charged with showing every student that they will be protected, nurtured, and disciplined as needed by the designated prefects of Hogwarts, regardless of their status and presumed destination. I expect as Slytherin prefects that each of you will show in your duties why the House of Slytherin is the most noble and true of all the founding 4. Pusey concluded as if he had not just repeated Snape's Slytherin supremacy in front of the other heads of houses as a justification for showing up at the Hufflepuff head of house's orders. Per Professor Sprout's orders. I have the extracted memories of Crabbe, Goyle, and myself of the whole incident. Just a bit of first-year idiocy, sir. Honestly, Noodles was the designated adult of the whole thing. If we had one of him in every compartment, the prefects could nap on the whole ride in. Pusey offered with a smile that was genuine only in the sense that it was a mask, very clearly labeled mask, and waved clearly to the entire audience so they were very clear that it was indeed a genuine mask and not a real expression. The gesture was so very Slytherin that Snape was forced to smile. "Very good, Mr. Pusey. You remind me how you earned that badge." Snape said icily. "Very good indeed, Mr. Pusey. 10 points to Slytherin." Professor Sprout cheered happily, then continued with a husky and dangerous undertone. "Now perhaps we could all pop these in that pensive I see behind you, Albus, and we could settle the matter and see which, if any, students require punishment." Professor Sprout said with a smile that Neville watched in open horror, Flitwick with appreciation, and Hermione with the beginnings of understanding. Dumbledore flinched and retreated. Perhaps young Mr. Pusey has the right of it. A bit of first-year nonsense that was blown out of proportion. No sense keeping the children up any further. I think we can end it here as a bit of unfortunate overreaction that shall not happen again. Yes, Albus offered, the mask of the kindly grandfather again in place. "A moment, sir. A matter has come to my attention that I must beg to be allowed to address with Potion Master Snape." Harry blurted, his earlier intention to address the matter privately failing in the face of the opportunity everyone's presence together offered. Professor Snape sneered as he looked upon the very image of that strutting peacock that was James Potter, again strutting to arrogant life, to demand recognition for his mediocre talents and monumental ego. "My housemate Neville, heir to the most ancient and noble house of Longbottom, has been discovered this day to be the victim of intentional long-term poisoning by exposure to a suppressor toad. While I have been trained by the finest goblin potioners in how to make a chelating solution, my own efforts would only suffice to remove the toxin currently in his blood. I was told it would take the work of a true potions master to safely remove the buildup of suppressor toad venom and its lethal breakdown products that would have built up through long-term exposure without either killing the victim, or at best, leaving him with magical channels so badly compromised he would be little better than a squib. When I asked my own potions teacher at Gringotts where such potion masters could be found, the only name that my own professor would cite as sufficient to such an exacting potion creation was Potion Master Severus Snape. Sir, House Potter begs Potion Master Snape to attempt such a therapy, with the understanding that the success of such a therapy cannot be guaranteed, even with perfect mastery. Professor Sprout gasped in horror, and her wand began waving over Neville in a series of long and complicated motions as she chanted softly. Professor Flitwick joined her, and the two of them muttered together before looking over at Professor Snape and nodding gravely. Snape, for his part, looked down his nose at Harry Potter, his eyes focused like a striking serpent upon the hated vision of his rival reborn. His eyes locked upon those of blazing green, so like those of his mother, the woman who had shown similar loyalty to him that her son showed to his friends today. A loyalty he had only twice, and most irrevocably, failed. Harry Potter stared back at him, resolute in placing himself in life debt to one who was a sworn Death Eater, in fact, if not in allegiance, and who had been no small part in his parents' death. The boy did not know. The boy did not know that Snape already owed House Potter a life debt for saving him from Sirius Black's prank that nearly saw him killed by the werewolf Lupin. He further did not know of the second, less grudging life debt Severus swore when his unknowing sharing of the Trelawney prophecy resulted in Lily's death at the wand of Voldemort. There is no debt to assume, heir Potter. I stood in the debt of your house already, though you knew it not. You are correct. There are none living in Wizarding Britain, and indeed no more than 3 in all of Europe who are capable of such a treatment. Of them all, I am, without boasting, the most skilled. Snape said slowly and firmly. Professor Snape turned to the Longbottom boy. Mr. Longbottom, you will owl your grandmother this night with a complete accounting of how you came to be poisoned. The fact that such long-term poisoning and its effects on your core have been confirmed by your head of house, and ask her written permission for me to begin the potion therapy required to clear your tissues and magical channels of the toxin itself and the potentially lethal breakdown products. He sighed. Mr. Longbottom, please be advised, as you have most likely been unable to perform any magic without putting an almost inhuman degree of focus, intent, and brute force to get any effect at all, when your magical channels begin to clear, I expect you will be somewhat of a danger to yourself and others. Kindly strive to be at least somewhat aware. Snape finished, rubbing his temples at the thought of the cauldrons this would cost him. It is safe to say that all 4 heads of houses left that office with much to think about. The headmaster that remained looked upon the wreckage of his plans for the boy who lived and sighed. Still, Dumbledore mused, if he is not alone and without any support or guidance than me, he has delivered to me other hostages to fortune that can, should circumstances require it, be used to motivate him to make the required sacrifice. Dumbledore sighed regretfully. For the greater good. At this point, he had sacrificed so much upon that altar that 3 more dead children were hardly noticed. The cost of being the Light's champion was too high for any but himself to pay. That is why no one but himself would be allowed to know or to shape his vision of the necessary future. 5. Chapter 5. Cauldrons and Bludgers. Chapter 5. Cauldrons and Bludgers. Harry and Hermione were beside Neville in the infirmary as a very serious Madame Pomfrey worked to infuse the potion that Professor Snape administered to Neville into all of Neville's tissues, while Madame Pomfrey hummed happily and forced various magical fluids to ignore various laws of biology, chemistry, physics, and good sense through the power of advanced medwitchery. Professor Snape explained the new reality Neville Longbottom would be living for the next 6 months. Mr. Longbottom, for the next 6 months, your tissues are going to be liberating a neutralized suppressor, toad toxin, suspended in enhanced regenerative matrix through your pores. To enable this to be safely excreted from your body, you must use the body's existing structure for tissue purging, with the resultant effluvia that your fellow students will require you to purge before you attend class. Professor Snape intoned seriously. Harry grinned and translated. Professor Snape's potion essentially gives you troll regeneration, coupled with a potion that locks on to every bit of toxin in your body and draws it into your sweat glands. Either you work until you sweat it all out and take a good long shower, or you will be a half-sized troll in a very tight classroom. Hermione looked concerned. Can't he just apply some sort of deodorant? Miss Granger, while I am a certified potions master and a pioneer in the field, I could not even conceive of a way to mask the smell of a troll in confined spaces. The traditional answer is to burn the property to bare earth with fiend fire and build somewhere else, preferably upwind. Snape sneered. Neville looked crushed. What am I going to do, Harry? Harry grinned. Congratulations, Neville. you just enlisted in the Goblin army. If there is one thing I can guarantee about Goblin basic training, it is that you will sweat out every bit of vital fluid you or 6 generations of ancestors have ever had. You might die, but you will be certified toxin clean and fit for the cover of Witch Weekly's Warlock's swimsuit edition. Harry chimed. Neville looked at Hermione pleading. You will be coming too, right? Noodle slid seamlessly from Harry's sleeve to Hermione's and coiled around her protectively. Hermione raised her head and said quite firmly, Noodle and I will be doing revision by the fireplace, away from sleet, sweat, and the smell of fresh troll. Why is it the only one with any brains isn't the speaker? Mouse Giver is clearly the sensible one. I will stay with her. Trolls and Inferi are the only 2 things not worth biting. Noodle hissed, agreeing with Hermione and voting by slither. Harry and Neville set to their early morning routine of run, push-ups, sit-ups, chin-ups, and had begun to work on sparring. They had come to know that there were in fact a small number of highly motivated and totally insular senior students who also had early morning workout routines. 2 red-headed Weasley boys, the Gryffindor beaters, helped identify one group as the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Thus clued in, they soon spotted Cedric Diggory and Adrian Pusey leading groups of the Hufflepuff and Slytherin players, but not the whole team like the long-suffering Gryffindors. The break in their workout routine came from the Ravenclaw team, who decided that Hufflepuff first years jogging at the same time they were constituted spying, and hexed them with jelly leg jinx, with warnings if spotted near their run again, they would be transfigured into garden gnomes and dropped off in the herbology greenhouses as decorations. Walking off the jelly leg jinx, they came to the old Quidditch annex, out of use since the Malfoys paid for an expansion of the facility. Coincidentally, the year Lucius Malfoy ran for election to the Board of Governors. The sounds of battle caused Neville and Harry to pick up their pace and jog on wobbly legs to see who was fighting. What they saw was a very angry-looking Millicent Bulstrode with a heavy-looking one-handed club, hammering what looked like a flying bowling ball against a wall. The bowling ball seemed to be enchanted and determined to kill Millicent. As they jogged after it, struggling to bring their wands up, not that they figured the knockback jinx or stinging hex, which was the sum total of their defense against the dark arts attack training, would stop a rogue bowling ball when Millicent shouted finite, and the bowling ball fell placidly to the ground. What are you 2 badgers doing out and about before class? Millicent asked. Harry pointed his wand at the currently inoffensive bowling ball and said firmly, We heard you fighting and came to help you out. Who enchanted that to attack you? Was it Draco? Harry guessed, naming the only Slytherin he knew who would randomly attack his own housemate. Neville, who was leaning on Harry and trying to catch his breath, wheezed out. It's a bludger, Harry. They always attack players. That's the whole point of a bludger. Millicent was probably just doing beating practice, right? Neville gasped, getting his breath back and wiping slimy grey sweat off his brow. Harry blinked. He knew the theory of Quidditch, but it seemed like just another silly thing wizards did for reasons probably having to do with too much time inhaling strange fumes and wand twiddling and not enough time doing productive work. While hitting balls at each other sounded foolish and faintly wizardy, flying through the air at high speeds while enchanted bowling balls were actively trying to kill you, then smashing the little balls of random homicide at your enemy with your own weapons. That sounded like war. Goblins loved war. Can you teach us? Harry asked. Harry, I am out here every day doing whatever beater drill I can to get better because Marcus Flint, the head beater of Slytherin, keeps reminding Captain Pusey that Slytherin alone has never had a female player. If a dragon wanted to swap bludgers at me with its tail, I would buy it a damned cow for breakfast. Neville looked concerned. Harry, me gran won't let me play Quidditch. She won't even let me own a broom. Harry looked at him firmly. This isn't Quidditch. This is medically mandated therapy. You have 2 choices. We just do push-ups and sit-ups while you stink up close and personal, or we fight like warriors with clubs, fighting enchanted cannonballs. Harry cheered. Bludgers. Millicent and Neville shouted, their Quidditch Puritan hearts shocked to hear their beloved sport compared to the Muggle practice of lofting vaguely aimed bits of iron at each other instead of dueling like sensible people. Whatever, cheered Harry. Goblins knew wizards were silly, and knew their sports must be even sillier. The idea that they had a hidden form of war, not simply tossing spells at each other, but proper war with weapons that depended on strength and skill, not even on the ground, but in a loose chaotic madness in the sky. Harry's heart fell to his first boyhood love, Quidditch. For the first 2 weeks, they played beater in the middle with Millicent on the ground between the two, then gradually worked their way up to brooms in hover mode. It was in this hover mode they were spotted by a pair of Gryffindor gingers, ever so curious as to why they kept hearing the sounds of bludger and bat at 5 in the morning in the rain when they already knew where all the house teams were playing. "I say, Fred, do you see what I see?" said George. "Baby beaters, George. 2 badgers and a snake," said Fred. "It's like watching," started Fred, "a baby bird flapping its wings in the nest," concluded George. They looked at each other and nodded. "Never learn to fly that way, Fred," said Fred. "Best way is to kick them out of the nest, George," said George. "Either they grow wings," offered Fred piously, "or they pretty much bury themselves," concluded George practically, looking firmly at each other, then nodded again. "This calls for a prank, then," they said in stereo. "Definitely." They responded to each other, then trotted back to the castle, with mischief, mayhem, and a certain intent to do their bit to aid their Quidditch juniors along their path to death or glory, frequently both, in the holy halls of Hogwarts beaters. Neville noted, when the time came to explain to his Gran how it was, exactly, that he hadn't seen it coming in time to show the slightest bit of good sense, care for his own life and limb, or the heart condition of his beloved Gran, that it was mostly Snape's fault, and thus not something Neville could really have controlled. It began, as did many disasters, with the potions rotation. Potions class was a mixed class of Gryffindor and Hufflepuff. This traditionally had been an easy class for Snape, as it was only the Gryffindor boldness and general academic laxness. The bright were bold enough to be risks, and the dim were lazy enough to be another kind of risk. So Snape had a decade's worth of experience teaching him that it was the Gryffindor students that would be the source of his problems. In fact, Neville and Harry found potions to be both a joy and a terror for them. Neville's greatest love was herbology, and at the lowest level, potions were more about ingredient knowledge than magical power, meaning that Neville was something of an expert in ingredient nature and preparation. His problem was his healing. Magical channels were giving him about a dozen times more magical power than he had ever handled, and his system was still healing. How much it delivered changed in random surges. Harry was getting used to his wand. No goblin was allowed to use a wand as a power focus. It was exclusive to wizard kind, and had finally settled the question of dominance of the surface world. He had the runes of power, the key to amplifying goblin magic to nearly a match to human wizard. Only Professor Flitwick and Harry had ever had both. Flitwick, of course, didn't have his mother's magic wrapped in a shard of Voldemort's own power added to the mix, so even Flitwick didn't have quite the control issue that Harry had. What Harry did have was extensive experience making goblin potions. While he had no experience imbuing power with his wand, he had been doing potion preparation and cooking for half his life. In order to neutralize the Gryffindorish tendencies of half his class, Snape had his students in a rotation, so each Gryffindor would work with each Hufflepuff. This hopefully spread the burden of the Gryffindors, while exposing them to actual work habits. For both Harry and Neville, this had worked fine. They could do all the preparation and follow the brewing instructions, only requiring their Gryffindor partners to add power with their wands at the required points. Enter Ron Weasley and Seamus Finnegan. Ron was working with a broken wand, and the redhead was refusing to look Neville in the eye as he blushed and muttered almost too low to hear. "I can't do that bit. You do it," Ron muttered. Neville, who had spent over 40 minutes of non-stop prep work on everything from the acromantula web gland milking, because spiders, man, I can't even, to the gentle flaying of the stranger fig roots, because the membranes are required for the potion, but become ineffective if the sap from any of the root veins becomes mixed in, looked at Ron in horror. "But I have done everything else," Neville hissed, aware his own power was finally starting to return under Snape's potion and the daily exercises, but with no real consistency from moment to moment, let alone day to day, and how much came when he called. His control was problematic. Ron showed his wand, broken in 3 places and held together with spello tape. Look, Neville, I had it in my back pocket when I got in a fight with that Pratt Malfoy. I hit the little git good, but then that great walrus he calls Crab tackled me, and it kind of got like this. Every time I try magic, something pretty bad happens. Neville looked at the wand, and Ron honestly wasn't the sharpest fang in the lion's maw. If Ron, who was honestly pants at potions, tried to gently infuse his magic to blend the Strangler vine essence and Acromantula silk base, he wasn't sure what would happen. With a nervous hand, he took his own wand and began to infuse his magic, pushing just enough to feel it in his wand, all the while chanting softly to himself, "Please don't blow up, please don't blow up, please don't blow up." Seamus was arguing with Harry. "Look, mate, I know it says to slowly infuse for 20 minutes, but I have to hang a wicked piss. If we really give it a good blast, we could be done in like 2 and I can go drain the cauldron. What do you say?" Seamus said, pointing his wand at the secure bind potion that Harry had worked so hard to keep from disaster. Seamus had been non-stop trying to toss in half-chopped ingredients, or toss in 2 steps together to help it get a move on, and Harry was at the end of his rope. The potion took 20 minutes of magic infusion to cure because there were 3 separate plant ingredients whose task was to keep the binding agents solvent and to give them explosive dispersion once the potion vial was given an activating magic pulse and tossed at a target. If you didn't bind each agent to the other in the potion, it was liable to simply blow up now at some unknown state of binding. Anything from a dangerous explosion, fire, to being webbed in artificial acromantula silk that proceeded to strangle you without the force limitation programmed by proper curing, could occur. "Listen, Finnegan, you point that wand at this cauldron and I will feed it to you. It says take 20 minutes because it takes 20 minutes," Harry hissed. Potions required discipline and care. They were like dragons, useful and necessary beasts that performed perfectly right up until the second you stopped paying attention, and they ate you alive. Taking out his wand, he began to channel the magic through it. This potion goblins could not make because it required far more magical power than a goblin could channel without draining themselves totally. A wand was a power focus, a massive amplifier. For a wand-wielding wizard, the amount of power was negligible. For a rune-enhanced goblin, already amplified, using a second amplifier they were only beginning to understand. It was like trying to walk a curious baby dragon through a china shop with narrow aisles to the meal it could see, but not reach yet. For 10 minutes, Harry and Neville managed to cage the twin beasts of their powers, before Seamus Finnegan crossed his legs and decided he needed to pee more than he needed a good mark on this potion, and it was pretty close to the light pink they were aiming for. Sliding his wand out under his robes, he poked it against the edge of the cauldron and just gave it a bit of help. Harry was meditating, balancing the flood of power against a counter-flood of control, letting the slow, gentle draw from the potion passively draw power from his wand, as its slow and gentle eddy lapped at the edge of his awareness with quiet hunger. Then a brutal wave of power landed in the gentle whirling pool like a drunken teenager doing a cannonball, and in defensive reflex, Harry's power lashed out in a jagged bolt 100 times greater than the trickle he had been allowing. Harry's potion exploded. Neville had been sweating as he forced his body to produce enough power to keep the reaction going, while using his will and intent to strangle it down to what he guessed was the right flow for the potion, based on the speed it swirled and the change in aroma to the light peppermint the text promised for a completed potion. Then Harry's cauldron exploded, and Neville, without really thinking about it, rammed his power through the cauldron to Harry's in a reflexive attempt to take control of what was about to blow his friend up. Neville's cauldron, for the record, did not actually explode. It did achieve an instantaneous acceleration equal to a Muggle blunderbuss, before ramming into Harry's cauldron and blasting it into the wall, where Harry's cauldron did indeed explode. Where Mr. Longbottom's actions, arguable, saved the lives of Harry Potter and Seamus Finnegan, at the cost of 2 rather cherished school cauldrons, it must be noted that the contents of both cauldrons failed to make the journey, and the entire potions laboratory, its students and professor, were indeed blasted with acromantula silk that indeed had bonded with the stranger fig membrane which it demonstrated by attempting to strangle said students and teachers. While the class was released to the medical wing and then to lunch, Harry and Neville got to sweat out more of Neville's potion and much of Harry's acromantula silk strand coverings by scrubbing the walls, desks, floors, and ceiling of Snape's beloved potion dungeon. It was thus that Harry and Neville arrived at the afternoon flying lesson with Slytherin exhausted, distracted, smelling like trolls, and most critically, with their problematic magic surging with awakened power. Adrian Pusey and Cedric Diggory looked on in confusion as they both came to the field where the first years were about to undertake their flying lessons. The note from the Weasley Beta twins could well be a prank. They were famous for them. But among the Quidditch teams, it was generally accepted that the one thing the Weasley twins took seriously was Quidditch, at least the Beta portion of the game. What the dreaded Gryffindor duo meant for the Slytherin and Hufflepuff's captains was unclear, but the two decided to wait. After all, while not everything the Weasley twins thought was funny was in fact funny, it was always exciting. Madame Hooch took the field and told the students to stand by the brooms set out by their names. Hermione was quite nervous, as while Neville and Harry had been doing beta drills on the school's ancient Comet 260s, a child training broom with the very helpful hover, setting the two boys had been training on with Millicent that disabled the wizard or witch's own control of elevation. Today they would be rising up under their own power. Hermione was of two minds on the whole witches and broomstick thing, thinking it a patriarchal negative stereotype used to demonize female power. This warred with the very real excitement that came from learning both brooms and flying carpets had been exclusive witch inventions, only later copied by wizards, and represented very real testimonies to female magical empowerment. Added to Hermione's fear not of heights, but of lack of personal control, and the broom flying lesson had her up the whole night before learning and drilling herself in the levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa. If someone were to fall, she could save them. If she were to fall, well, it was her quiet commitment that she will think about that and maybe have a good panic attack on the subject immediately after class. Harry and Neville were too shell-shocked from potions to realize their brooms were clean sweep sevens, the Quidditch team's competitive brooms, not the Comet 260 student training broom with all the extra safety features. Millicent Bulstrode was not shell-shocked and was deeply curious as to why her broom was a clean sweep 7, something her house would never let a first year, let alone a girl, touch, and why there was a bludger bat in the below broom clip where it rested. Glancing over, she saw every other Slytherin around her had a Comet 260 and no bludger bat, but a glance at the Hufflepuffs showed her the slightly flared forestock of clean sweep 7 and the suspicious bulge that hinted at a bludger bat beneath both Harry and Neville's brooms. She frowned. What in Merlin's bat-filled beard was going on? Madame Hooch, in her no-nonsense way, firmly instructed the students to step up to their brooms, raise their hands, and give the command. Up. Hermione was attempting to coax her broom like a kitten on a high shelf she would really like to come down, more slowly and carefully than it got up, pretty please. The broom rolled back and forth like it wanted to, but was at least as scared about leaving the ground as she was. Neville and Harry simply held out their hands, and while Neville said up, firmly and clearly, Harry more or less said blurg. But the broom seemed to think that was good enough, because both boys felt the broom plow into their hands with punishing force, waking them up from their half-days after potions. After a few minutes, when Madame Hooch coaxed each of the riders to straddling their broom, she gave the next command. Your brooms are all set in hover mode, so just let your power flow into them, fill them with the intent to rise. You do not have to worry about rate or height, as your broom is in hover mode. Just let your power fill the broom like you would your wand, kick off from the ground like the wand motion for a charm, and give it the intent to rise. Once we have you hovering off the ground, I will begin to teach you the broom motions and mental commands that will allow you three-dimensional control of your broom. Madame Hooch said, as the whole class, for once, seemed to be paying attention. Neville, who had enjoyed the hover mode bludger practice immensely because he could let his power off leash and not worry about things blowing up, was quite relaxed as he let his power flow free, gave a slight kick to the ground, and thought about flying. The clean sweep 7 was used to a fair amount of power, as competitive Quidditch players tended to be a magically potent lot. But the young Lord Longbottom had been magically pent up for so long his core was swollen to bursting with power, and the mental machinery controlling that power had been so used to forcing through largely blocked channels that they used quite a bit more force than necessary when the time came to let that power flow. Neville shot into the sky like a screaming dragon, except a dragon screamed as it took to the air as a warning to others that they were going to die. Neville was screaming in the shore and certain knowledge that he was going to die. Harry didn't really think. On any other day, he most probably would have. He may still have hopped onto a broom and charged after his friend, but he would insist until his dying day that it would not have been his first thought. He did not, in fact, think. Harry kicked off from the ground and tore after Neville in the sort of howling charge that his arms masters would recognize as a goblin berserker charging towards a death he already accepted. Millicent Bulstrode had a moment to think. Two, in fact. One she spent thinking, and the second she spent swearing. By Morgana's saggy left tit, if you live I will wear your balls as earrings. Millicent swore as she tore into the sky at the best pace the best broom she had ever ridden in her life could reach. Madame Hooch, long experienced with first years, thought she was ready for anything. When the students topped 50 meters in less time than it took her to scream at the other students to step off their brooms, she decided to revisit her worst-case scenarios. It took her precious seconds as she tore her own Comet 260 into the sky to disable the hover mode and the student basic training elevation limiter on her broom so she could reach the insane heights her students had already achieved with no signs of slowing down. It was for this reason that she missed hearing twin gingers pop up from the end of the field and shout in stereo. "Bludgers up," they shouted, releasing 2 bludger. "Bludgers up," they shouted again, releasing 2 more bludgers. "Bludgers up," they shouted a third time, before high-fiving and jogging over to the waiting Adrian Pusey and Cedric Diggory. Cedric blanched. He knew neither of his Hufflepuffs had actually flown a broom before. Goblins don't have them, and Neville Longbottom's grand's restrictions on her delicate baby boy's life were something of a light faction running joke. "They are going to kill our first years," Cedric said, ready to charge the pitch and take a broom to initiate rescue. Adrian grabbed his arm and stopped him. "Give it a second, Diggory. The Weasleys have never actually harmed another student, especially a first year." They watched a very large bush of brown hair that seemingly had a witch under it someplace march out to the center of the field and point her wand at the sky, like she was planning on blasting the flyers or bludgers out of it. What a first year with a wand thought she was doing was anyone's guess. But what was clear is that 3 of the 4 flyers had noticed the bludgers soaring at them like the broadside of a British man-o'-war, and the one who hadn't was Madame Hooch. The bludger hit her clean in the back, blasting her off her broom. As she tumbled through the air, she tried to draw her wand, only to be clipped in passing by a second wave bludger that snapped her arm cleanly and sent her wand spiraling towards the soft green grass she was plunging towards at a velocity that might well not be survivable. Hermione Granger had a firm grip on her wand and on her emotions. With a swish and flick, she gave the charm with all the practice a solid night and lunch break could give, and the blind panic she was suppressing gave her magic, if not wings, then at least several hundred legs intent to scamper as quickly as possible. The last words Madame Hooch expected to hear this life were, oddly enough, given in a very serious alto that sounded less like a spell and more like some sort of dog training command given to an underperforming Labrador. "Wingardium Leviosa," little first year said, and Madame Hooch found her upside-down eyes staring into the very intent expression of a fierce-looking Hermione Granger. With a firm and controlled downward motion, Madame Hooch found herself lowered to the turf, and then ignored as Hermione pointed wand and eyes back to the sky, dismissing her teacher as no longer relevant. Adrian Pusey slid his own wand away, his arresto momentum only on his lips with the little fuzzy Hufflepuff girl already caught her falling teacher. He turned to face Diggory and smirked. "Quite the batch of firsties you badgers have this year. Might be interesting to see how they grow." Pusey drawled. Diggory was staring up in something between wonder and horror, answering Pusey's comment with his own. "Bloody hell, Pusey, what do you feed your snakes?" Diggory said in something like awe as he watched the battle in the sky unfold. Millicent had been last in the sky, and that put her first in the line of fire as no less than 6 bludgers charged towards her. Freeing the bat beneath her broom, she turned to face them head-on, as no beater wanted to face bludgers from the back if they could help it. Watching with concern as the bludgers blasted Madame Hooch from the sky, Millicent recalled crying into her pillow, swearing she would become a beater this year or die. Turns out, both. With a snarl, she dove into the charging bludgers and swung her bat at the lead bludger with the focus, and will to actually nail the lead bludger from the second wave, and buy her a critical second or two to deal with the first 2 waves separately. The second bludger howled into her with her bat out of position, so she tucked her leg around the broom and spun around its axis, allowing the bludger to pass above her as she ducked beneath the broom. As she came up from the roll, she blasted the incoming trailing bludger from the second wave from underneath, driving it straight up where its momentum would carry it safely past her. The 2 from the third wave wove around each other in a deadly spiral, and she knew she would only be able to block one. Tensing her stomach and neck, clamping her jaws tight, she prepared to take the second hit and try to stay on her broom. A fall from this height could be fatal. As her bat came down in a pair-splitter cut, designed to blast the bludger low and force it to trade acceleration for height before it could come round again, she braced for the impact of the second bludger. The crack when it came was loud, as was the scream. Neville Longbottom screamed as he dove his broom down and blocked the bludger with a classic line drive, blasting it about 30 meters away before it could even come to a stop and begin building momentum towards them. Millicent had one moment to process the fact that she was alive and unhit before a second crack from above and behind her caused her to spin and see Harry Potter pivoting his broom as he blocked the bludger she had hit first as it came around to hit her again from behind. Millicent knew that with 6 bludgers and 3 beaters they were stuck on the defensive, but they had trained together for weeks now and had actually drilled something like this. Granted, it was with 2 bludgers and 3 beaters. No one fought bludger outnumbered. That was suicide. Quidditch side. Stupid anyway. Form a wheel, the Slytherin girl shouted, and Millicent began to spin sunwise as she and the 2 Hufflepuffs began the 3-beater war against a horde of 6 angry and increasingly frustrated bludgers. For 5 long, painful minutes, 3 first-years beat 6 rampaging cannonballs in a musical duel of death far above the ground, as 2 ginger Gryffindor beaters, an amused Slytherin and amazed Hufflepuff Quidditch captains observed the most extreme bludger drill of their young lives. Madame Hooch finally spotted her wand, and with a shouted Akia wand, caused it to fly to her hands. Turning to the sky with her unbroken hand, she pointed to the sky and shouted, "Finite," and began blasting the deactivation commands to the bludgers with rather more force than was necessary. The bludgers fell from the sky and rolled sulkily towards their boxes to be put away. Turning to the group of senior Quidditch players, she spotted the Weasley twins and fired 2 full body binds that left them mummified in rusty chains right to their sparkling blue eyes, before turning a very disapproving gaze on the 2 watching Quidditch captains. "Secure those bludgers, and if I find out you had anything to do with this, I will have you scrubbing dragon intestines with your own toothbrushes from inside the dragon," Madame Hooch hissed angrily. Cedric Diggory and Adrian Pusey observed the 2 Weasley twins being levitated towards the school and inevitable detentions, noting how many times they, accidentally, fell and bounced off the ground. "I think Madame Hooch must be feeling the broken wrist, or maybe she just can't cast well left-handed," Cedric offered as he watched the first years trailing after the bound twins and their teacher towards the school. Pusey chuckled as he watched Madame Hooch flicker and dip the Weasleys in a mud puddle, and he quipped, "Yeah, that must be it. Still, the twins have a point. That was some impressive beater work for first years." Cedric stroked his chin. "Honestly, my pair from last year are doing their newts this year. They told me they are available a little bit to train, but they aren't returning to the team." I was kind of unimpressed with the others who tried out for it last year. Pusey nodded. "Shame Bulstrode is a girl. Marcus Flint is my senior returning beater, and he is as bad as our first captain was about the whole Slytherin knows Quidditch is a man's game thing." Diggory turned and looked at Pusey in shock. "You are not going to try her out. She stopped a 5 bludger strike on her own. the Hufflepuff said in shock. No, it's a shame because I am going to have to listen to Marcus whine all damned year, and his voice is like listening to a troll fart in slow motion. I am a Slytherin. We do what it takes to win. Bulstrode may be a good beater this year, but she is a firstie. That means if I train her up, I can pass a beater just as good as those Weasley morons to the captain who takes over from me in 2 years. Adrian Pusey said smugly. Cedric Diggory grinned. True, but I will have two. Also, I am only third year to your fifth. I get them longer. The two captains grinned at each other, looking forward to close-fought season. They were in school to learn the skills and powers of their future trades and to make the social and political connections for their personal and family fortunes. Quidditch, on the other hand, was theirs. Their own struggle, their own glory, their own personal war, and the Weasley twins had just found 3 little warriors to join it.